this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
You're listening to a podcast, so you're doing something else too, like maybe scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving places you like without thinking you'll get them, because that's what house hunting has become. But Redfin isn't built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. Redfin agents close twice as many deals as other agents, which means when you find a place you love, you've got a real shot at getting it. Redfin helps turn saved listings into real addresses. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Time for a sofa upgrade? Introducing Anabay Sofas, where designer style meets budget-friendly prices. Anabay brings you the ultimate in furniture innovation with a modular design that allows you to rearrange your space effortlessly. Perfect for both small and large spaces, Anabay is the only machine-washable sofa inside and out. Say goodbye to stains and messes with liquid and stain-resistant fabrics that make cleaning easy. Liquid simply slide right off. Designed for custom comfort, our high-resilience foam lets you choose between a sink-in feel or a supportive memory foam blend. Plus, our pet-friendly, stain-resistant fabrics ensure your sofa stays beautiful for years. Don't compromise quality for price. Visit WashableSofas.com to upgrade your living space today. Sofas start at just $699 with no risk returns and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Get up to 60% off, plus free shipping and free returns. Shop now at WashableSofas.com. Offers are subject to change and certain restrictions may apply.
Do you want to find a stress-free way to buy your next car? Start at CarMax and shop your way. And if you want to browse with confidence, get pre-qualified online with no impact on your credit score and shop cars within your budget. From luxury cars to family rides, CarMax has options for almost every price range, including more than 25,000 cars priced under $25,000. So, hey, want to get started? Just head to CarMax.com for details and get pre-qualified today. Want to drive? CarMax.
Cool Zone Media.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here, and I wanted to let you know this is a compilation episode. So every episode of the week that just happened is here in one convenient and with somewhat less ads package for you to listen to in a long stretch if you want. If you've been listening to the episodes every day this week, there's going to be nothing new here for you, but you can make your own decisions. Oh, boy howdy, welcome back to It Could Happen Here, a podcast about it happening here. And the it is different most episodes, but today the thing that is happening here is discussion about the growth of self-immolation as a form of protest from the 20th to the 21st century. Obviously, we are recording this less than a week after Aaron Bushnell, a 25-year-old serviceman in the United States Air Force, lit himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., and, repeatedly stated Free Palestine as he was doing it. He said more than that. Obviously, he wrote, I think very clearly about why he did what he was doing. This is something that you'll have heard a lot of debate about. There's a certain kind of person, particularly in the media, who feels obligated to say this is mental illness and we shouldn't discuss it as anything else. I think that's wrong for the same reasons, by the way, that it's wrong to dismiss, any sort of mass shooter or whatever as mentally ill. Not that either of those are similar in terms of the actions. They're not. Yeah. But that attempt to dismiss it because it's something, it makes you uncomfortable to consider that somebody could do something so incomprehensible to you for a logical reason. Now, when I say a logical reason, that doesn't mean I'm arguing this is something more people should do. It doesn't mean that I'm arguing that this was the best thing that Bushnell could do. What I am saying is that from everything that is available, this was a rational act. He understood what he hoped to accomplish with this, and he took concerted steps to ensure that he succeeded and that attention was drawn to it. His reason for doing it was clear. He took actions like to set up a will and whatnot. This seems to have been a rational and principled action. And we're not really primarily going to be discussing what Bushnell did, because I don't really know that there's much to say. It's everyone here's stance that what's being done to Gaza is a genocide. I don't know that this will help. I certainly hope that somehow it does, but we're simply not at a point where we can say what the impact of this on the overall, situation in Gaza is going to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess like the thing we can say off the bat is like whether or not this matters is to a large extent up to you, because like someone like, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like
it matters in the sense that it has an impact on the. Obviously, I think it matters like, because he was a person, right?
Well, that too, right? Yeah, but like, yeah, in the sense of whether it accomplishes political objectives, like that's up to us figuring out how we're going to run a political movement in such a way that the genocide gets stopped.
Yeah, and that is that is not something I have a clear answer for you on now. But I do think I think the thing we're going to try to do that I think can be helpful in this is attempt to provide some context on what is the history of self-immolation as a protest tactic. How does it tend to work in the past and in the present, and in what sort of situations has it been more or less effective as an instrument of protest? That's what we're going to try to cover today. Obviously, this should not be seen as a totally comprehensive look at the entire history of this. Because as I'm about to cover, this is what we can get for you in about a week, and I think it will help and provide a broader sense of context as to how this sort of thing has worked in other situations around the world and throughout time. Self-immolation goes back very far as a protest tactic. There were Christians who were being persecuted by the Roman government in Nicodemia in 300 AD who lit a fire in front of the emperor's palace and threw themselves into a bonfire as an act of protest. In Russia, I think in like the 1600s, Orthodox, there was an Orthodox sect. I don't really know much about them, but they locked themselves in churches as a protest for some of the Tsar's reforms, and then lit those churches on fire. So like died inside the churches that they were in. So this is a kind of thing that goes back quite a while. I'm sure there are other cases in ancient history that go well before that, but it's not a new thing. However, when we talk about kind of 20th and 21st century self-immolation, the first sort of really famous case of this, and the one that like gets brought up every single time people talk about self-immolation as a protest tactic, was one that occurred during the Vietnam War, and it was the self-immolation of a Buddhist monk named Thich Quang Duc. I believe that's Thich. I think that's how that's pronounced. I listened to it before we started recording this, but that kind of stuff slips out of my head, so I apologize if that is the case. He's an interesting guy. I think pretty. His early life is probably pretty common for people who became Buddhist monks in kind of central Vietnam in this period of time. He left home when he was like 7. He became a novice at 15. By 20, he was a full monk. And one of the things that's happening during this period of time is the South Vietnamese government is this guy. He's called the president. He is a dictator, I think, in everything but name. Ngo Dinh Diem. And he's a terrible guy. He's a French-educated Catholic, and if you know anything about the French history in Indochina, right, like that, that does not suggest somebody whose role before Vietnam got its independence from France was particularly great. His brother Ngo Dinh Nhu is the head of the secret police, and they are, despite the fact that South Vietnam is a Buddhist majority country, they're passing a lot of policies that are like actively cracking down on and reducing the right of Buddhist people to worship, right? And, there's a lot of reasons for this, but they kind of boil down to the fact that Diem was horrible, was just a fucking dog shit leader.
Absolutely sucks.
Yeah, really, really trash. Now, I've heard it said online when people bring up the self-immolation, within kind of the context of what's happened recently, like this wasn't people are wrong when they say this was an act of protest of the Vietnam War. It wasn't. And that is technically true, because like the thing that Duc was protesting was not U.S. involvement in Vietnam, but he was protesting the U.S.-backed government of South Vietnam, and that government is very relevant to why there was a Vietnam War. So I do kind of think it's not entirely accurate to be like, well, this wasn't a Vietnam War protest.
Like, no, well, it was just about the fact that like the Catholic theocratic drug dealing fascist government was like murdering Buddhists.
I don't know. Seems like you're splitting a hair there, bro. I feel like the murdering Buddhist thing might have been part of why there were so many people willing to fight the South Vietnamese government. Not a 0% part of that equation, maybe. But yeah, so these guys, these Buddhist, the Buddhist religious leaders in the country get increasingly angry about what's happening. There are debates, I think, for several years, kind of within sort of the more highly ranking kind of leaders in the faith as to like, what do we do about this crackdown on our rights? And like, should we? They were talking for quite some time about having a self-immolation protest, right? Like it was the kind of thing where there was a decent amount of like discussion earlier. And Duck is actually the one who I think suggested it initially to like other leaders in the church. And yeah, while there was like, for a while they tried to push back against this, eventually the level of prosecution just became so clear that, you know, they basically said, okay, let's like, you can do this. And Duck is going to be the guy who is going to like physically, you know, destroy his body in order to carry out this act of protest. As is always going to be the case when we talk about these famous self-immolation cases, half of the story is the guy who does or is the individual who lights himself on fire, and half of the story is the reporter who happens to be there. And in this case, it was a guy named Malcolm Brown. He is, I believe, he's an American reporter. He's stationed in, you know, Saigon, and he's you know, doing what a lot of journalists were doing at the time. And in the springtime of 1963, there start being like these kind of messages put out by the Buddhist church that are sort of, he describes it as hinting as some kind of spectacular protest. His guess was that it would, quote, most likely be a disembowelment of one of the monks or an immolation. And either way, it was something we had to pay attention to. And like a lot of journalists, he's got some sources within the church. He gets a call one day and they're like, you should show up at this pagoda at this specific time. And here is how Malcolm describes what he saw. By the time I got to the pagoda where all this was being organized, it was already underway. The monks and nuns were chanting a type of chant that's very common at funerals and so forth. At a signal from the leader, they all started out into the street and headed toward the central part of Saigon on foot. When we reached there, the monks quickly formed a circle around a precise intersection of two main streets in Saigon. A car drove up. Two young monks got out of it. An older monk, leaning a bit on one of the younger ones, also got out. He headed right for the center of the intersection. The two young monks brought up a plastic jerry can, which proved to be gasoline. As soon as he seated himself, they poured the liquid all over him. He got out a matchbook, lighted it, and dropped it in his lap and was immediately engulfed in flames. And, yeah, that's, you know, what happened that day. Malcolm takes a picture of, he takes a bunch of pictures. You can see all of them. There's a good Time article, Malcolm Brown, The Story Behind the Burning Monk, that has all of the pictures that he took, or at least like a long list of them, and they are worth seeing. They are, I shouldn't have to put a trigger warning in here, right? These are photos of a man burning to death. Like,
that shit sucks. Can say from researching this. Good God.
It doesn't look good. It looks really bad. Yeah. Now, obviously, one of the photos, you've probably seen it, where like half of the monk's face looks okay and the other half is just like wreathed in fire. This goes like the 60s equivalent of viral, right? President Kennedy said of the photograph, no news picture in history has generated so much emotion around the world as that one. And at the time, it may have been true. And it is number one, it does have a role in the anti-war movement because, you know, this is related to a protest against a government we were backing. But this is also one of the more successful, maybe the most like directly successful cases of self-immolation I've seen, because this does play a significant role in the end of Diem's presidency and his life, right? So Duck leaves a note, like a lot of these people do. And his note, again, is very clear-minded. He ends it by saying, before closing my eyes and moving towards the vision of the Buddha, I respectfully plead to President Ngo Dinh Diem to take a mind of compassion towards the people of the nation and implement religious equality to maintain the strength of the homeland eternally. Yeah, when this kind of happens, as I quoted earlier, Kennedy is like shocked and furious. He yells to his national security advisor, who the fuck are these people? Like, how did we not know this was going to happen? He's very angry about all this.
Does he know what a Buddhist is? Like, I feel like, like that's the kind of people who
I actually have trouble imagining like JFK having a significant amount of context as to like what Buddhism is.
Oh, God.
But maybe I'm wrong. So I want to quote from this really good Medium article, The Suicide That Changed American Policy in Vietnam, by Apurva Tadepalli. And this is for a series they write called Nearpod, which is an interactive classroom tool for students. And I found this a very readable and concise description of kind of what happened after Duc's self-immolation. Quote, the publicity of the incident increased pressure on Diem's government to deal with the crisis, but he did not take the incident seriously enough. His response to the death was an announcement on the radio later that day that wildly missed the point. The state of affairs was moving forward so smoothly, he said bizarrely, when this morning, acting under extremist and truth-concealing propaganda that sowed doubt about the goodwill of the government, a number of people got intoxicated and caused an undeserved death that made me very sorry.
Okay, I feel a lot of terrible statements about self-immolations doing this. That might be the worst one.
It is. This guy, we need to do the Bastards episode on him because Diem is, like, he's horrible. He causes a lot of damage to a lot of people, but he's such a fucking scrub, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, fucking Stalin would never, you know? Like, the OGs. Like, very sad. You think Saddam Hussein would have gotten caught up in that shit? No. Not my man.
This is Bush League shit, even by, like, fucking, like, East Asian dictators. Like, can you Chiang Kai-shek? Like, no way.
Oh, no, Kai-shek wouldn't have gotten caught up in this shit. Absolutely not.
Chiang Kai-shek, if someone had tried to do this specifically in Chiang Kai-shek would have shot the guy himself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God. So anyway, this scrub, he makes like a promise that they're going to do reforms and stuff. And like while he's doing this, his family, including his brother Nu, who's like the head of the Saigon secret police, is saying like literally says, if the Buddhists want to have another barbecue, I'll be glad to supply the gasoline.
Jesus Christ.
And his wife, who's like a very Marie Antoinette figure, Madame Nu, who is it's his brother's wife, but she's basically the first lady, right, of South Vietnam. She's like, let them burn. We'll clap our hands.
Oh God.
So it's pretty cool. Like Diem is actually kind of the smart one in the family because he's trying to like tell his sister-in-law and his brother-in-law like, nah, bro, or his brother and his sister-in-law like, you guys don't understand. We have to be a little bit careful here. This could really go badly.
Yeah, it really seems like they haven't figured out the playbook for dealing with this yet.
No.
Because, like, the successive governments, like, everyone has, like, the same line that they say when it happens. And these people, it looks like they're really kind of scrambling here.
They didn't have any, they'd never even considered that something like this could happen. There would be reactions to their policies like this. There are a bunch of protests by monks and nuns. The police arrest a bunch of people. This continues to draw outrage and make the situation worse. Nu, the secret police guy, has his goons like ransack and destroy a bunch of like Buddhist temples, basically. A lot of people, like 1,400 people, are like rounded up and arrested. Diem accuses the monks of being part of the Viet Cong, which is again like
sure,
such a
okay.
So one of the things that is important to understand here is that this is at a very different stage of the Vietnam War. The U.S. has troops in the country, but not a lot, like very few compared to how many are going to be there. And at this stage, Diem actually isn't happy that we have, even though it's going to become very clear that like the U.S. troops are the only thing allowing this regime to stay propped up.
Yeah.
He is like, I don't want them here. They don't even have passports, right? Like he's like weirdly anti the like, and part of it is because the U.S. is about to act here finally to take support away from his regime. So 3 days after his buddy, his brother-in-law or his brother Nu has a bunch of raids on these Buddhist temples, there's a cable sent from DC to the U.S. ambassador in southern Vietnam that's like, we're not backing this guy anymore. And this ends with a bunch of South Vietnamese generals who had already been planning a coup being given the go-ahead from the U.S., basically saying like, our guys are not going to take any actions to stop you from overthrowing this guy. And on November 2nd, Diem and his brother are kidnapped while trying to escape, and they are killed not long after. So this is, pretty successful self-immolation, you have to say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Seems like it works about as well as you could have hoped for that, right? Like at least I'm sure is as well as that monk hoped, because, Diem is not just out of power, but is fucking killed as a result of this. So,
although the problem is the subsequent people the U.S. put in charge, also suck. But
that's also part of a pattern, unfortunately. And there's like a history of self-immolation leading to regime change. We're going to talk about Tunisia at the end of the episode. And that does tend to be the story of like, yeah, we got rid of the dictator. And then a guy who sucked just as much came into power.
Hey, well, the Taiwan one we're going to talk about in a second actually goes pretty well.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And before we go into that, because we're going to let you take over from here, Mia, or at least for the next couple of parts of this. But first, let's let our advertisers take over. And we're back. All right, Mia, you are on deck.
Yeah, so I think people are kind of broadly aware, kind of, if you know anything about self-immolations, about the self-immolations in Vietnam, and then also the sort of the ones in the US, like as anti-Vietnam War protests. The ones that I don't think most people here know, and that I only know about like because like my mom was born in Taiwan, right, is the Taiwanese self-immolations. Yeah, so this guy's name is Chan Yang-rong. He's also known as the thing most people call him is Nylon Jung, for reasons that I guess will become clear when he lights himself on fire. So Nylon Jung is a very, very influential I don't know if very, very influential is quite the word, but he's a pretty famous and very influential pro-independence activist in Taiwan during the KMT's occupation there. And this is something I don't like. Americans tend to not understand this very well. So the KMT, the Chinese Nationalist Party, they take power in Taiwan after just invading it effectively. When they lose the civil war, the KMT's like remaining forces and a bunch of their supporters like flee to Taiwan. And there are like three groups of people who the KMT like spend most of their time killing. And that is communist feminists and Taiwanese independence activists. They also hate Presbyterians for reasons that are...
Hey, we all hate Presbyterians, am I right?
Okay, look, I am not normally a Presbyterian liker. The Taiwanese Presbyterians like legitimately do good work in the sense that they're like one of the groups that's like pretty important in bringing down the KMT one-party dictatorship. But, okay, so Taiwan has this like really appalling like one-party dictatorship. Nylon Jung's actually born, I think, if I'm remembering this right, he's born like during the February 28th incident, which is this thing in 1947. Actually, we are 2 days, I think when this goes out, we'll be 2 days after the 77th anniversary of it, where there's a giant uprising in Taiwan because the like people in Taiwan fucking hate the KMT because they suck and they murder people. And there's this giant uprising, and the KMT eventually, like, their military forces get reorganized, and so the initial uprising takes most of the island, and then the KMT just come back and kill everyone. They kill about 20,000 people in a week. It's one of the sort of like, I don't know, one of the kind of like defining incidents in what becomes sort of Taiwanese national culture. It's just this like massacre. And then, you know, it's basically, it's illegal to talk about afterwards. This is the beginning of the sort of white terror in China, and they're going to, you know, and this is the start of the KMT kidnapping and torturing like tens of thousands of people. One of the things that happens in this is actually, so this was my family's experience of it, is that, okay, so there's the uprising, right? But one of the things that starts happening pretty quickly is these like retaliatory killings against Chinese nationals. And that was stuff my family was like, yeah, we like couldn't go outside because if you leave your house, like you're going to get killed by mobs. And that stuff like sucked.
Yeah, that does sound like it sucked.
No, it's not good. I mean, it's the thing because it's weird because it's like that uprising, like broadly good, but it turns like parts of it turn into race riots or like it's weird. Like I don't know. It turns into these like anti-Chinese national like riots, and that stuff. You know, so Zhang is from a Chinese like just from like a sort of like Chinese national family that like fled to Taiwan after the war. And his family is protected by other Taiwanese like uprising people who are like, no, like we're not going to fucking just kill these random Chinese people. Like, what are you guys talking about? And that's this really formative thing for him, sure. Where this is one of the things that causes him to grow up to become like the kind of Chinese, like Taiwanese independence activist that he is, where he's one of these people who is really big on Taiwan as like liberating Taiwan as a nation, but having it be like a nation of ideals, not a nation of blood, because because he sees how badly this kind of like ultra nationalist bloodline like shit can go. And so he becomes like a pretty prominent independence activist. He runs one of the anti-party newspapers, like anti-KMT newspapers. And he's mostly doing a lot of this stuff in the 80s where, so basically like you have two consecutive, like there's Chiang Kai-shek, and then you have like more guys from that family. By the 80s, like democratization is kind of like slowly moving forward because the Taiwanese ruling class is losing American backing. They're losing backing overseas. But, you know, even by sort of 1989, which is in the period in which people are talking about like, well, democratization's happening, like it's going to go forward. The country still has, like they haven't had like real national elections, and they still have these really, really intense, what are called anti-sedition laws. And so one of the things that the pro-independence activists, and this is the period in which like Taiwan's like modern ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party, like comes into existence, or like they're coming into existence as the anti-KMT party. And this is the sort of milieu kind of in which Lai Long-jung is sort of mobilizing, right? But he's also, I don't know, he's a kind of guy that doesn't exist anymore, which is like he's kind of like a liberal progressive national liberation supporter. So I found a really interesting thing translated by Yen Han Chen, on this guy I kind of am aware of from Twitter, who translated this thing that he wrote about Palestine, where he is a pro-Palestine guy. But it's interesting because he sees Palestine as like another nation that's been like subjugated in like a similar way to Taiwan has. And, you know, and he's like an anti-armed struggle guy, but he's also he's very committed to Taiwanese independence as a national liberation movement. And specifically, like, the thing that you're liberating it from is the KMT. And so, you know, he gets into trouble constantly with, like, the KMT government. They arrest him a bunch of times. And eventually, in 1989, he gets charged with these anti-sedition laws. He gets charged with insurrection for, like, spreading drafts of a potential new Taiwanese constitution. And so he barricades himself in his office, refuses to show up to court. He gives this giant speech about how, like, you'll never take me alive. And the police kind of take him seriously. He's barricaded himself in, like, his newspaper offices, and he's there for, like, 2 months. And at the end of month 2, a cop who is the current mayor of New Taipei City tries to burst down his door.
That doesn't seem like a job that you should be able to have.
No. This is one of these things where it's like, okay, so like the KMT, this is one of these things about sort of Taiwanese politics that's weird, is that the KMT is the modern sort of pro-China, pro-unification faction, right? Those guys suck. Like they're not the same sort of like just death squad party they were in the sort of late in like the 20th century. But they're also like, yeah, no, it's literally their mayor of New Taipei, which is okay. I'm not going to go into what the difference between New Taipei and Taipei is here. That's a whole thing.
I'm guessing it's like the difference between, you know, New York and Old York, right?
It's closer to the difference between New York City and New York.
Okay.
But
that makes sense. Yeah, that works.
But like this guy who again like was elected like 2 years ago tries to kick down his door, and Lai Long-jung lights himself on fire. And this has a enormous impact on the sort of subsequent course of Taiwanese politics, because this is a PR disaster for the ruling for the current government, which had been trying to sort of like do its like, we're doing moderate reforms, blah, blah, blah. You have local elections now. We're doing democratization. And suddenly, like, their cops break down this guy's door and he lights himself on fire. And, you know, that the cop later says, like, oh, yeah, we broke down the door because we were trying to save his life. It's like, no, you didn't. What the fuck are you talking about? Like,
I love things that have never happened. That's my favorite kind of thing.
Yeah. And, you know, so this is one of these things that and this is actually a thing that's a very, very common thing at protests like now. So Lai Long-jung has this massive funeral. And this is an absolutely enormous funeral march, and the police attack it. And when the police attack it, another pro-independence activist also lights himself on fire, like in front of the cops when they refuse to do it. And that second guy is like a lot less remembered than Nalin Zheng, but this becomes a massive sort of rallying cry around, like, you know, for the pro-independence people, but also for the sort of broader fight for like actual free democratic elections. Like the big thing these people were protesting, like specifically, was free speech, because the thing about the sedition laws is if you start passing around copies of the Constitution, they try to arrest you and throw you in prison.
Yeah, I mean, nothing says sedition like the Constitution of the country you're in.
Yeah, and like, you know, changing it, I guess, is sedition. It's like the KMT really suck. Like, cannot emphasize that enough. But the sort of the results of this is that, you know, okay, like, so this is one of these actions that's kind of complicated because the arc of Taiwanese politics was bending towards democratization and some kind of like actual electoral system. And it probably would have happened even without this, but this supercharges the whole process. Within about 2 or 3 years, all the sedition laws are repealed. And it takes a while before you get, I think it's like 2000, I think, is like really when what you can call like the first really free like Taiwanese national election, when there's actually like a transition of power between the KMT and the Democratic Party.
Sure.
But yeah, it was to a large extent very successful. Like, I don't know. Okay, so it accomplished the goal of knocking off the KMT sort of one party state. It knocked off sedition laws. The kind of Taiwanese independence, like, that's very, very sort of national liberation driven, is kind of not the same one that exists in Taiwan now. It's a bit different. But on the other hand, like, yeah, they did it. It was pretty effective. And yeah, I don't know. Like, this is of the ones that I've seen, I think this was the most clear he won. Nalin Zheng's like is sort of to this day a pro-independence hero. There's a statue of him. So they I think I'm pretty sure they turned the office where he lit himself on fire like into a museum. And there's a very famous sort of like pictures of the statue of his burned corpse. That's just harrowing. It's one of the symbols of the sort of Taiwanese democratic movements. And it's also a sort of, it matters a lot. This is also happening in the same year as Tiananmen. Like,
yeah. So there's that kind of like, it's in the air, right?
Yeah. And his widow goes on to be a DPP politician. And it's one of the things that it like his memories invoked during like, so in 2014, Taiwan had their own version of Occupy that's like shittier, called the Sunflower Movement. I'm sorry. This is where we're getting into the Mia has a bunch of political beefs with people in Taiwan.
Okay.
Where I think they're all libs, but it's, yeah, like they have their own sort of, they have like this large series of street protests, and this, like, he's one of the figures that's, you know, one of like brought up in as like a sort of martyr
that's going to be the same thing
stuff.
with the guy in Tunisia we're about to talk about too, where they become, even to people that they would not, you know, certainly we're not like expressing similar views, they still become this like icon that gets cited. Yeah.
And I think the last thing too is he's the fact that the cop who kicked his door down is now the fucking mayor of New Taipei City is just like, appalling stuff. Yeah, the KMT absolutely suck. And those are the people who want Taiwan to be reunified with China. So if that, understand who you're making your bed with, if that's the kind of politics that you want to be engaged in. Yeah, so that's the Taiwan self-immolations. I guess kind of, I don't know. Not enough bad things happen to the cops who trigger this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
which
they often
sucks.
don't.
Although I guess the cops in South Vietnam didn't do great.
No. I mean, ultimately, right? It doesn't immediately really cause them any problems.
It takes a while.
The secret police a bit. Speaking of secret police, this podcast is sponsored entirely by the secret police. So, you know, check that out. And we're back. Yeah, we just got beaten by phone books because they don't leave any bruises by our sponsors at the Secret Police. So, the Secret Police, like the police, but secret. Mia, did you have another one you wanted to get into before we talk about Tunisia?
Do we want to do Tibet first, or do we want to do Tunisia first?
Why don't we do Tibet?
Yeah, so I think, other than Tunisia, I think the most famous wave of self-immolations was the ones in Tibet that started in about 2009. There is actually a guy in Tibet who lights himself on fire in the late 90s, but that doesn't have the same kind of sort of... It doesn't have the same effect as the 2009 ones. So one of the things that's been periodically happening, I guess, over the sort of course of the history of sort of occupied Tibet is the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama flees. There's this whole giant drama in 1959. So okay, I guess I should go back to the beginning. So Tibet is just straight up invaded by China when after the communists win the civil war. This causes an enormous amount of shit to happen. One of the things that the Communist Party is trying to do is they are trying to gain control of the Tibetan religious system so that they can eliminate the religious system. They can eliminate the Buddhist clergy effectively. They can eliminate Buddhist monks. They can eliminate the religious institutions as a source of resistance to them. They are kind of foiled in this when the Dalai Lama makes this break and escapes to India. And this is one of the things that triggers eventually in the 60s China's war with India. But one of the things that have been happening for a while was these kind of negotiations between the Dalai Lama and the Chinese government to try to find a kind of resolution to how bad things were in Tibet. And in 2009, the Dalai Lama goes, yeah, none of this is fucking working. It's nothing, we're not getting anything. The Chinese government's not offering us any actual deal that we can live with. And pretty quickly, you get this giant wave of self-immolations. The first guy is this guy named Taipei. He is a monk. He lights himself on fire in 2009. There's conflicting reports. Okay, so one of the problems with talking about this is that in this period, the internet is not as widespread as it is today. And there was a giant, there was a Chinese media cordon effectively on Tibet in a very similar way to West Papua, where they won't let journalists in. It is very hard to get information out. So the thing that I'm about to say is something that is reported a lot on the time by people who are trying to smuggle messages out. And the thing they report is that as this guy is self-immolating, the Chinese police shoot him multiple times.
Well, I mean, as we've seen recently, that is how cops tend to look at somebody someone has lit themselves on fire. Clearly what this situation needs is a gun. And okay, so the Chinese police, I don't have any evidence of them shooting people after that. They absolutely, one of the things so what happens after this is this wave of self-immolations, this protest across Tibet. The thing that they absolutely do a lot is start beating the person who's on fire with a stick. Using riot sticks. Sometimes they have riot sticks with spikes on them, and they are absolutely beating people to death while they are burning to death. The Chinese police are as maybe not quite as absolutely murderous as the American police, but they are beating a burning man to death, right? That is oh god. Yeah. I will say that is definitely, I can't think of anything I've ever seen U.S. police do that is more violent than beat a man to death while he's on fire. That's up there. That makes the cut.
It's really bad. Yeah. And this is the kind of thing that, this is the kind of thing that sets off these self-immolations in the first place, which is that Tibet has, has a colonial occupation, right? It has, the Chinese government has been attempting to suppress Tibetan Buddhism. Sure. There's been a massive systemic, massive ecological destruction of the Tibetan plateau so that the Chinese government can mine gold and shit. And in a way that's very similar to sort of the ecological devastation you get in places like the Amazon. There are, there are intense police crackdowns all the time. There's another very famous incident that's kind of one of the things that leads to this, where in 1989, there's a bunch of protests in Tibet, and the cops just start shooting them. They kill a bunch of people. And so, and people had been, like, up until 2009, people had kind of had this promise that things were going to get better because, you have these negotiations between the Chinese government and the Dalai Lama. And then the Dalai Lama turns around and goes, yeah, no, they're not giving us anything. Like, they're giving us nothing. The Chinese state's policy on Tibet is that effectively we're going to try to make these people Han effectively. One of the things they spend, and they do this in Xinjiang too, is there's a lot of resources invested in getting like Han settlers from other parts of China to move to Tibet. As is true also in Xinjiang, the cadre jobs are basically all government cadre jobs are basically all Han people. And so, you start getting attempts at civil disobedience. There are these giant protests in 2008, attempting to make a sort of a giant thing happen right before the Olympics in order to get international support. And those turn into riots, and those are brutally suppressed. And once that happens, people are really they're running out of options for civil disobedience because, and this is one of these things about this kind of Buddhism is that it's very much their resistance tradition is nonviolence, right? Like these people, very, very rarely you get riots, but they're not going to try armed struggle. And so what they have is nonviolent civil disobedience. But the problem is that if you try to do nonviolent civil disobedience in China, what happens to you is the cops show up and arrest you all. And then they arrest your families. And this is something that happens to the people who self-immolate, is that there are 160 of them from 2009 until now.
Oof. And
when someone lights himself on fire, what the Chinese government does is, well, A, they beat the person to death while they're on fire. B, they start arresting the people's family. They start arresting their friends. They start arresting people in the monasteries that they're at. They start doing these purges to stop, to remove the sort of Buddhist monks who they think are going to be problems. And this fuels this kind of cyclical wave of this because on the one hand, there's this incredible repression going on. On the other hand, it's not possible to wage other kinds of mass civil disobedience campaigns. And the thing about lighting yourself on fire is that the government can't stop it, right? In theory, you could maybe train police to stop people from lighting people on fire. But the thing is, the actual thing that happens when someone lights himself on fire is the cop goes and beats them. And so it becomes this sort of it becomes this sort of this cycle of self-immolations. And also, I mean, the other thing that's worth mentioning too is people. There are a few other cases of Tibetan Buddhists outside of Tibet who do it. There's a few people in India who light themselves on fire, and I don't know. I think the Tibetan example is really bleak because it doesn't work. They lose. And this is one of these situations where I don't know, I legitimately don't know how they could have won because they were dealing with a very, very powerful state apparatus that was very invested in using all of its state capacity to repress them. And it fails. And the thing that it mostly accomplishes is just a generation of, well, I mean, some the youngest kid who self-immolates is 15, right? And it mostly accomplishes a bunch of these kids light themselves on fire and die, and everything is worse now than it was in 2009.
Yep.
I think, so very recently there've been protests in Tibet again because the CCP is trying to build a dam that's going to flood and destroy a bunch of monasteries. And I don't think anyone's lit themselves on fire over it, but the police just arrested everyone. And so, I don't know, it's really bleak. And I think the Free Tibet movement has become much weaker as the sort of 2010s went on, to the point where now I think most of the sort of broad American far left basically just takes the Chinese line on it, which is that the Dalai Lama was a slave owner and the Chinese occupation was a gift.
Yeah.
And like, I want to take a minute to talk about this because
I hear that a lot.
Yeah, and it's this thing where, like, you know, it's really interesting looking at a lot of these people who are anti-Tibet but pro-Palestine, because, you know, if you look at the originators of settler colonial studies, like people like Patrick Wolf, right, who was like the godfather of settler colonialism studies, Tibet is one of the states that he holds up like as the paradigmatic example of what settler colonialism is. It's Palestine and Tibet, right? And you know, and I, like the thing about, oh, it was because they were trying to like free the Tibetan serfs really pisses me off, because if that was the actual thing the CCP wanted to do, they could have done a thing that happened all over the fucking world in communist countries, which is they could have moved in, they could have knocked off the government, and they could have set up a communist Tibetan state, right? This happens all over the fucking Eastern Bloc. There's precedents for it in East Asia, which, you know, there's a precedent of Mongolia, which was also, I mean, a very different Buddhist society, but also a largely Buddhist society, where the Soviet Union went in, knocked off the government, and set up an independent Mongolian state, right? And I'm not going to say things like went great for Mongolia, but the thing is, if your actual objective is just knock off a theocratic government that you don't like,
yeah,
you could have done that, and they don't.
Yeah.
They don't do it.
And also,
they incorporated it into fucking China.
It's also worth like stating, like, yeah, things maybe not like didn't work out great in the immediate term for Mongolia, but Mongolia as a state right now is not like the worst. It's not doing as badly as like Tibet is doing. You know, like it's an independent country that functions more or less. And who does better than functioning more or less, really? Yeah,
like and this, I don't know, and this is the sort of that's one of the things that like Chinese nationalists tend not to really use that line. I mean, they use it a bit when they're personally, like, when they have to like specifically make arguments about the Dalai Lama. That's something they do, but most of the arguments that the actual like supporters of the Chinese government in China, the arguments they make is like, oh, well, these people are shitty barbarians, and we have to civilize them, and like our invasion was a gift to them because we're going to civilize these people. And like it's literally, it's like identical to the shit that like that the Israelis say about Palestinians. We should also very briefly mention that a lot of the surveillance technology that's used in Tibet, like, are cameras that the Chinese government sells to Palestine. So keep that shit in mind. Yeah, and I don't know, but this is one of the really bleak examples, because the thing about self-immolation as a politics is that, like, it functions by mobilizing someone else, right? And in some cases that's you know, that's another government. In some cases that's your own government. In some cases that's the people around you. But if you're in a state where the government does not give a shit about you, and they have the ability to ruthlessly repress anyone who's inspired by your actions, it leads to a lot of people dying. And I don't know what the sort of lesson from that is, other than it's really hard for, and this was the thing with Hong Kong too, is it's really hard for any one part of China to try to go into revolt against the government, because there's so much more of the rest of fucking China. And if you alone are pitted against the entire might of the Chinese state that has broad popular backing, you're fucked.
Yeah.
And it's really bleak, but
yeah, I don't have anything positive to say there. Hey everybody, Robert here. Our discussion ran very long, so this is going to be a two-parter. You'll be hearing about Tunisia and more in the next episode. But for now, please continue listening to our podcasts and not other podcasts, because why would you do that? Who would do that? Nobody I like.
Let's talk about modern home shopping. It's sort of become a fun side hobby, right? Scrolling listings at night, dreaming about kitchens you've never seen, or backyards you haven't even stepped foot in, all from the comfort of pretty much anywhere. Redfin knows a lot of people like you want to own, but are stuck in this browsing mode loop. That's where Redfin flips the script. With listings that update within minutes and tours you can book right from the Redfin app, you can see your dream home the moment it appears. Now, liking a listing is easy, but actually landing it, that's where Redfin comes in. Redfin has over 2,200 agents with local expertise. And Redfin agents close twice as many deals as other agents. That means they want to help you win, not just window shop. Redfin is built to help you go from just looking to wait, this could actually be home. So become the newest neighbor on the block. Visit redfin.com to start finding and start owning. That's redfin.com.
Sink into affordable luxury. Anabay is the only machine-washable sofa, inside and out. With stain-resistant slip covers and a cloud-like frame duvet, everything goes right in the wash. Plus, the modular design lets you change the look of your space anytime. Visit WashableSofas.com to upgrade your home. Shop up to 60% off site-wide, with sofas starting at just $699 and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Shop now at WashableSofas.com. Offers are subject to change, and certain restrictions may apply.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Hey everyone, Robert Evans here, back to introduce It Could Happen Here, part 2 of my discussion with Mia Wong of the history of self-immolation protests. We'll be starting with Tunisia in this one and then moving on from there. So please buckle up and listen in. But I will move us on to talking about Tunisia, which is the last place we will talk about self-immolation protests.
I want to end, I guess, a bit. I want to end after you talk about Tunisia with one in China that kind of worked.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that'll be nice. So there was Tunisia existed for most of the 21st century under a dictator. This state of affairs changed for, unfortunately, a fairly limited period of time on December 17th, 2010, when a young man, I think he was 26, Mohamed Bouazizi, went out to sell fruit. And, Mohamed lived in a very poor region, a very poor part of Tunisia, the city of Sidi Bouzid. It's about 100 miles south of Tunis, which is the capital. And like a lot of people, in that part of the world, it is not uncommon, particularly for young men, because unemployment is so high for young men, to kind of make their living doing a mix of odd jobs and odd vending, right? Where you're just kind of selling whatever you can get your hands on and think that you can make a profit on, because there's not jobs in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
And because political corruption was so horrific in the state at that point in time, it's one of those things where most everybody who's out there selling shit on the street is breaking the law by doing it, right? Because you can't get the permit, because the permit is basically a bribe and you can't afford the bribe, right? That's how a lot of this stuff works. So, Mohamed, kind of prior to this, he had been, his friends, when you read interviews with people who knew him, he was always one of these guys who was really upbeat and funny. His nickname basically meant funny man in town. And this had started to change. Friends noticed a couple of years before, 2010, when hits his mid-20s and starts getting into his late 20s, that he's it is impossible to get by as a young man. There are no jobs for us. There's no future. I don't feel at all I have nothing to be hopeful for, right? I think a lot of people can understand, empathize with where he was coming from. So he goes out to sell fruit, and this municipal inspector, Faida Hamdi, sees him, realizes he doesn't have a permit, and takes his shit, right? And there are accounts that he hits him too. Basically, he's what the fuck is wrong with you? You're not paying your goddamn bribe, and smacks him around. So this is kind of the breaking point for Bouazizi. He goes to the police station because he's got like this scale that he's using to like weigh out fruit and stuff that he wants to get back. It had been confiscated and he like can't work without it. And they tell him like, fuck you, you're not getting shit back. So he says like, I want to meet with the governor and like plead my case to the guy in charge. And they're like, fuck you, the governor doesn't want to see you. So at about 11:30 a.m., he takes his cart outside of the governor's office. He pours, I think, lighter fluid, something flammable over his head, and he lights himself on fire. His cousin gets a call. Ali Bouazizi gets a call, I guess, from someone who was nearby and knew them both and was like, Muhammad just lit himself on fire in front of the governor's office. And Ali runs there, sprints over to the governor's office with his smartphone. And he gets there in time to record his cousin's body being taken into an ambulance. Protests start up after this almost immediately. People take to the street. I think it's just everyone is living under the same regime. They're living under all of these like fucking corrupt ass officials. Everyone pieces together this.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning this is also a period of massive increases in food prices.
Yes,
which are one of the big like if you want your protest to work, like Spark plus rising food prices, great way to get it to happen.
Yes. So, the Spark catches fire, protests start up, and they do not calm down. Part of why they don't calm down is Ali Bouazizi stays out in the street. He uploads footage of his cousin's body to Facebook, and he takes footage of the protests too, and he just starts sending shit to Al Jazeera, right? So all of this footage he's taking like winds up on television that evening, and by the next day, other cities in Tunisia are holding protests. And this is the kind of thing where it's like, we all saw this, obviously with a different cause in 2020. Sometimes something happens that's so horrible that the whole country takes to the streets. Yeah. And that's what happens in Tunisia. So the president at the time, basically a dictator, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, does the normal dictator thing. He sends out, and non-dictators, right? We do it here too. Yeah. He sends the cops out to beat the shit out of everybody, right? But he's also, you talked when we were talking about Vietnam about like the playbook and they didn't quite have it down. Part of the playbook is down because in addition to sending the cops out to beat the shit out of people, he visits Bouazizi in the hospital because he lingers for a while, right? And he also has the guy who slapped Bouazizi, arrested. He's kind of desperately trying, like, maybe this will calm everybody down. It does not. Bouazizi dies in the hospital a couple of days later, and the protests, which are known now as the Jasmine Revolution, it takes about a month, but they force bin Ali to flee the country for Saudi Arabia and, successfully bring an end to his regime and the return of a democratic system. There are functional elections for a while in Tunisia. They gain a significant amount of like political freedom. Like there are some really significant inroads made in terms of like civil rights during this period immediately after the Jasmine Revolution. But things also don't get better, at least not enough, right? This is generally seen, Tunisia, as the start of the Arab Spring. And if you know anything about the rest of the Arab Spring, this was also seen as like kind of the successful case, right? Like shit didn't work out very well in Syria or in Egypt, but like
Bahrain.
Bahrain. But here they got rid of the dictator and they gained a lot of civil rights, and that's great. The problem is that the other issues, the high food prices, the fact that unemployment is at a nightmarish level, the fact that corruption was a hideous problem in Tunisia, this doesn't just go away, right? Because it's deeper than the dictator. The culture, whenever you have a culture of corruption like this, which is, by the way, it's not just the Middle East that has to deal with this, but if you've spent time in the Middle East, one of the things that is really depressing is how massive and absolutely different, by the way, from the kind of corruption that we have in the West. It is over there. The degree to which, and you start to care about this, not because you're getting fucked over as a tourist, because you really don't notice it much as a tourist. It's when you make friends in that country and you talk to them about like how many different people are constantly taking a little bit from them, right? And often not a little bit. Like the degree to which regular people suffer because every single person who is quote unquote a government official is just soliciting for bribes that's so much deeper than any one guy in charge, right? That's something you can't just revolt your way out of easily.
Like one of my professors in college, I don't know if he ever actually wrote about it, but he's Okay, long story, but he lived in Egypt for a long time, and one of the things he would talk about is like the concept of like the oddly powerful bureaucrat. So like his thing was like the guy who sells you tickets at like the train station in Cairo. Like that guy, if you don't fucking pay him, he can just say no, and you can't get on a train. And there's just like so many layers of like this guy who controls this specific thing and thus can fuck you over unless you like do what he tells you, which is usually give money. Unfortunately, we need to go to ads. We'll be back in a second. And we're back.
Yeah. And it's part of why it's more durable is it's not like I think in South Vietnam, when Diem was around, you have all this corruption, but a lot of it is top down. It is people who are loyal to the president, right? A lot of the corruption in places like this is bottom up in that it's not a situation where all of these men who are so loyal to the dictator have this corrupt position. I mean, that's part of it. I'm not saying that it's not, but a lot of it is that like, well, maybe it's technically my job to stop the guy who works at the train station from denying people entry if they don't bribe him. But if I do that, then maybe he's going to make a fuss about how I'm doing the same thing for like permits to fix your roof or whatever, right? Like it's so much more bottom up in a lot of ways. And so the reason this matters is that like shit doesn't really get better in Tunisia, right? And now that so while all these problems continue, corruption continues to be an issue, high food prices continue to be an issue, unemployment continues to be an issue, particularly for young men. Another thing that's changed is that now everyone has seen what Bouazizi has done. And like, obviously he dies horribly, but one thing that happens is like his family moves to Canada, right? Like and this is, I don't think fair to his family. I haven't seen the evidence they were like corrupt or whatever, but like, I think because they're able to like get out of this situation, it's seen as like, well, maybe if I do this, not only will it hurt whatever corrupt motherfucker, I'm angry at, but maybe shit will work out for my family, right? This is often not what actually happens, but there have been hundreds of self-immolation cases in the last 10 years in Tunisia. It has become, you might compare it to kind of mass shootings in the United States. Not obviously on a moral level. You're not doing nearly the same thing. You're not hurting anyone else. But in terms of the fact that it is this really, really shocking event that then becomes kind of routine because people pick up on it as like, well, this is what you do in this situation, One of the articles that I read for this was an AP News piece that interviews a guy named Hosni Kalea, who's one of the many Tunisians who have attempted or succeeded in killing themselves through self-immolation as an act of protest. Hosni survived, right? And he did not survive without serious injury, right? Now he has to, he covers his face at all times. His left hand, he's lost a bunch of fingers. His right hand has no fingers at all anymore. Like he is just grievously injured as a result of this. And he said when interviewed by the AP, quote, "I would never describe the act of self-immolation as an act of courage because even the bravest person in the world couldn't do it. When I poured the petrol over my head, I wasn't really conscious about what I was doing. Then I saw a flash. I felt my skin start to burn and I fell down. I woke up 8 months later in the hospital." And I found that really interesting because there's a lot of talk right now, with what Aaron Bushnell did about like principle and courage or mental illness or whatever. And like, to what do we credit something that is so incomprehensible to most people? And I found what Hosni says here really interesting because what he's saying is that like, you can't even call it courage, It's almost like someone else is doing it. You were animated by such rage and hopelessness that it's almost like someone else is in control of your body. And that doesn't sound like mental illness to me for certain. That sounds like desperation of such an extent that it's mind altering. I don't know any other way to describe it than that. And I'm not saying this is what goes through everybody's head when they self-immolate, but you don't get a lot of interviews with those people after the fact, right?
Yeah, well, like there's some people who survive in Tibet, and it's like, well, those guys, the Chinese government will not let anyone near them, right? Like,
no,
and like, I guess I should mention this about the Chinese government line on this is that it's very similar to what you see in the American press. It's like No, you're seeing the terrorist stuff too here, but like the Chinese government line, and this line works pretty well, is like these people were mentally ill, these people are terrorists, or they were like misled by like the Dalai Lama, who's like leading his people to the flames.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of the playbook everywhere for this, that like the one that kind of works is that one. It's you have to attack the moral character of the person because it's such an act of,
it's an inherently selfless act,
yeah. Right? And so the only way to do it
you
is
can't
to be
describe it anywhere else. They're lighting themselves on fire.
Yeah. And so they like, you know, it's the Roger Stone rat fucking thing of attack them where they're strong.
Yes.
And you know, so it's the attack on the moral character that like happens. I think the thing with Tunisia too is it's like the political alternative to this is this like rabid anti-immigrant politics in a way that's
we'll talk about that in a second, but it doesn't end well. One thing I do want to hit on is the degree to which, again, this kind of does function in Tunisia as like a mimetic virus. Hosni, the guy we heard from, survives, but his brother shortly thereafter lights himself on fire in an act of protest and kills himself, and his mother attempts to do the same. Right? Like 3 members of the family all carrying out self-immolation. And it is one of those things, this is listed as like an example of the tactic succeeding, and it does in terms of it gets the regime out of power, but things are not better in Tunisia, especially since, so, you know, there is a period of time where there is at least a functioning democracy and significant gains for civil rights, but because food still doesn't get affordable, there aren't jobs, you'll find a lot of articles from around 2020, especially where people are like, yeah, I guess freedom's nice, but it's not really worth much if you're starving, you know?
Yeah.
Which, you know, anyway, all of this leads in part to the coming to power of the guy who is currently leading Tunisia, Kais Saied. And as you noted, Mia, you know, this guy is a populist. He is elected with 72% of the vote. He frames himself like populists tend to do, as like, I'm outside the system. I'm going to help you take on the elite that have corruptly ruled our country. And he also is very anti-migrant, right? Tunisia, a lot of people who migrate into Europe do so through Tunisia, just for geographical reasons. And he is blaming a lot of their problems on, he does like great replacement shit, that all these black migrants are causing our country's problems. He inspires a wave of violence against black people in Tunisia that's pretty hideous and horrific, and he has gained a significant amount of backing from particularly the Italian government, I think also the French government, because he's cracking down on migrants, right? And those migrants come to Italy and France, and that's a problem for those governments. So they're supporting this guy who, by the way, has turned himself into a dictator. All those gains Tunisia had in the wake of the Arab Spring, he has rolled back. He has centralized power. He has more or less destroyed the judiciary as something that's independent. You know, if he's not a dictator, he's not all that far from it, you know? And he's being supported by these quote unquote democratic nations because racism, right?
Yeah, same reason they supported Gaddafi. Like,
yeah, when it comes to the politicians, it's a mixture of racism and just like, well, racism wins votes. And when it comes to like why racism wins votes, it's back to racism, right? Anyway, so that's Tunisia, more or less.
Unfortunately, we need to go to ads. We'll be back in a second. And we're back. Yeah, so let's end on a slightly more positive note so the line I was going to give was one about how, like, you know, I mean, this is the thing with Tunisia, right? Is like you have this, like Tunisia has effectively structural unemployment rates of like 30-40%, right?
Yeah, it's
and that's the thing that's the thing that can't be solved without changing the economic system.
Yep.
If you can have your political revolution without your social revolution, you'll be right back to where you were in like 10 years. The problem, though, the other thing is you can have your social revolution and also end up in the same place, which is where we're going with China, where. So there's a very famous. Okay, I guess the place we should start with this is that one of the I've talked about this a bit on this show. One of the ways that labor works in China, like structurally, is that so you're a contractor, you work for a contracting company. The contracting company is this like series of shell companies, and there's a payday on like New Year's. because that's when the financial, like the year sort of rolls over and that's when you get paid. And so these companies are designed to specifically go out of business like the day before New Year, so they don't have to pay any of the workers for the work that they've done. And this leads to a rash of protests in China, like every single year on New Year's Day. There's like this massive, there's protests like fucking everywhere because people have been screwed. It happens a lot with construction companies. And so there's one of the very common tactics you see is people like standing on top of buildings holding banners saying like, we're going to jump unless you guys like pay us. And so that's kind of the background of this, which is that's a fairly common kind of like workers' protest. In 2021, there's a delivery driver in Jiangsu something I didn't really talk about in the 10 episodes is that China's economy is increasingly becoming a gig economy. And this has been happening for a while now. And so this guy is a delivery driver for Alibaba, and he's like trying to change apps, and the app garnishes his wages and steals $700 from him. And that's an enormous amount of money.
Yeah, I mean, the app garnished his wages is a sentence that just makes me want to light something on fire. Yeah, so I get why this would spark protests.
Yeah, and he like tries to get it back, and they don't give it to him, and he lights himself on fire. And this turns into, so he lights himself on fire, and then like this is in 2021. This is the same year where that Temu employee falls over dead, dies in her bed from overwork, and also the same year when a Temu employee jumps off of a building because of overwork. Mm-hmm. And this sets off like a giant kind of shift in the way that the Chinese public is thinking about labor, because up until this point, people have been, like China, it's nowhere near as bad as Tunisia, but it also has this problem of like everyone works harder and harder. You're working 996, right? You're working 9 a.m., 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And you're working more and more and more hours, and you're not getting ahead, right? You're still stuck in your shitty apartment, and your app isn't paying you for the work you did. And this leads to a whole thing that sort of culminates in something I talked about a bit in the Temu episodes, which is the Chinese Supreme Court. Like the Chinese Constitution says you're not supposed to be able to work people for longer than like 35 hours unless like special circumstances. And the Chinese Supreme Court goes like, well, obviously you're not allowed to work people like 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And that isn't like in large part, and partially it's because of the Temu suicide and the Temu thing. But the other huge contributing factor to this, and the other huge thing contributing to Chinese society attempting to reckon kind of with their unbelievable overwork culture is the self-immolation. And it goes viral so fast that there's no way to sort of like cover it up. The Chinese government can't really just press the racism button like they normally would, because this isn't someone in Tibet or this isn't someone in Xinjiang. They can't really do that. And so they kind of they're forced to make at least like some kind of change, because it pisses off so many people in ways that like can't really be contained. So, I guess the lesson from that, if there is one, is sometimes, very rarely, you can back a government into a corner where the normal things that they would say about it, or like the normal like mental illness, terrorists, deluded things don't work, because the raw simplicity of what they did and why just breaks through the sort of media sphere thing. And
it's, again, very hard to predict, because obviously like this isn't the first, within the last 12 months, this isn't the first self-immolation of the United States, right? And the last self-immolation do I have media brain or what? The last self-immolation that we had, which I believe was over climate change.
There was a Palestine one too.
Oh, then there was so I guess we've had a couple, like two in the last, or three now, I guess, in the last like 12 months or so. But the other ones did not really move the needle, right? Why Aaron? I mean, I think part of it might have to do with how deliberate it was, and how it was very quickly picked up by local media and the national media. I don't know. That's really outside the scope of these episodes, but I hope you at least now have more of a grounding in like how this has gone other times people have used this as a method of protest, and hopefully that's of use to you. Anyway, have a good day. Bye.
Sink into affordable luxury. Anabay is the only machine-washable sofa, inside and out. With stain-resistant slipcovers and a cloud-like frame duvet, everything goes right in the wash. Plus, the modular design lets you change the look of your space anytime. Visit WashableSofas.com to upgrade your home. Shop up to 60% off site-wide, with sofas starting at just $699 and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Shop now at WashableSofas.com. Offers are subject to change, and certain restrictions may apply.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Let's talk about modern home shopping. It's sort of become a fun side hobby, right? Scrolling listings at night, dreaming about kitchens you've never seen, or backyards you haven't even stepped foot in, all from the comfort of pretty much anywhere. Redfin knows a lot of people like you want to own, but are stuck in this browsing mode loop. That's where Redfin flips the script. With listings that update within minutes and tours you can book right from the Redfin app, you can see your dream home the moment it appears. Now, liking a listing is easy, but actually landing it, that's where Redfin comes in. Redfin has over 2,200 agents with local expertise. And Redfin agents close twice as many deals as other agents. That means they want to help you win, not just window shop. Redfin is built to help you go from just looking to wait, this could actually be home. So become the newest neighbor on the block. Visit redfin.com to start finding and start owning. That's redfin.com.
Welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast sometimes, not even that occasionally, that's about a bunch of not very functional mass surveillance technology that's being deployed against all of us. I'm your host, Mia Wong. Also with me is Garrison Davis. Yeah, and so today we're going to be talking more about something we've talked about on the show, I think, a couple of times, but that is the ShotSpotter program. And there was recently a leak of the locations of all of ShotSpotter's like gunfire sensors. And with us to talk about it are the people who got the leak and wrote the article about where the ShotSpotter sensors are. And that is Dhruv Mehrotra, who's a staff writer at Wired, and Joey Scott, who's a freelance investigative journalist and photographer. And both of you two, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be talking to you about this. So I guess for the people who don't remember or like have not listened to other episodes we've done about this or have like read this article, which you should go read at Wired, it's great. Can you describe what ShotSpotter is and what it's supposed to do versus what it actually does?
Sure. Joey, you want me to take this or do you want to do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Well, ShotSpotter is a sort of controversial gunshot detection system built by the company SoundThinking. On the face of it, the tech is sort of straightforward. The company will basically install little sensors on streetlights and traffic signs in a jurisdiction, and these sensors are sort of like algorithmically tuned to detect gunshots. So when one of these sensors hears something, it basically will send an alert to an incident review center which will then like vet the sound, make sure it was actually a gunshot before then forwarding it to dispatchers who send a cop to investigate the sound. Activists and academics have been basically saying for years that this tech is inaccurate, and primes police basically to go to low-income communities of color expecting gunshots when likely they won't find any.
Yeah, and I think the specifically low-income communities of color thing is a big part of this, because so you all created a map of where the ShotSpotter sensors are from the data you got. And I looked at the Chicago one, and immediately I was like, I recognize that map. That is the map of where the non-white people are in the city. So it's...
Yeah, it's stark. I think a lot of the responses that I've seen on Twitter and in my email inbox are essentially that, like, look, this is just a map of where all the not white people are in whatever city that it's deployed in.
Yeah, and y'all did some analysis of what you found sort of statistically about where these sensors ended up, and like the sort of the I guess like class and racial composition of those places. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I'll take this one just because I worked on the analysis. So yeah, I mean, what we found is that more than 12 million Americans live in a neighborhood with at least one ShotSpotter sensor. We basically joined census data onto the locations of every single ShotSpotter microphone. And looked at the demographic composition of those neighborhoods. And, what we found is that in aggregate, nearly 70% of the people who live in a neighborhood with at least one sensor identify as either Black or Latino. Nearly 3/4 of those neighborhoods are majority not white, and the average household income in a neighborhood with at least one sensor is $50,000 a year. So these are low-income communities of color. It's kind of hard to describe it in any other way.
Yeah, and one of the things, and this has been a thing so I'm in Chicago. There's been a huge series of fights over getting rid of ShotSpotter here. And one of the things you hear all the time the ShotSpotter people will go, no, well, we don't use race as a factor for. Yeah, but like ShotSpotter insists that they don't use race at all in determining where they put these sensors, but they've still managed to somehow create this map. And I don't know. I'm wondering what you think about like their response, and whether and I guess this is more of a subjective thing, like how much do you actually believe them when they say this?
Well, I think when we were investigating this, we found that the police don't even know where these locations are. And so they're just giving ShotSpotter data of where to put this stuff. So the police can kind of wipe their hands of like, oh, we insisted that they put it in this place or anything like that. And I think, Druv can probably speak to this, but, the argument is this is where all the shootings are. And so that's where they are. But, when you investigate that, it doesn't call into effect. Like in other parts of the country outside of like Chicago or something, you look at gun violence and where these alerts are, they aren't just where the alerts are. Yeah. And, Pasadena's an example, shootings happen outside of where the alerts are, but they're specifically in a very specific part of Pasadena that is poor and non-white. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, when we spoke to SoundThinking, I think it's important to point out here that they did not dispute our findings or the sort of authenticity of the doc. But, they said what you would expect, that the sensor deployment is not really informed by race. And, the way it works, as Joey says, is that the company basically asks police department who purchased the systems for data about gun violence, which SoundThinking says is objective. But we have no idea what that data actually looks like, right? We don't know if it's all crime data, which might be, subject to enforcement bias, right? If they include things like drug crimes on there, drug arrests. So we just don't really know why SoundThinking, makes a recommended plan for their sensor deployment. The other thing that SoundThinking had told me is that, sometimes they'll ask for data and they'll do it this sort of data informed way. But other times cops will just say, like, look, we want the deployment in this area. And that might include like a stadium or a school or places where people gather. So, it's kind of, we don't really know why exactly sound thinking is deploying its sensors in any given location.
Yeah, and having them be deployed by cops is like is a spectacular way to have cop brain in terms of locations, which not I don't know, not an especially good way to get a statistically unbiased sampling of where you would potentially want these things. So I guess a thing we should talk about in terms of what the issues with the system are. Okay, so ShotSpotter claims that and this is something I've seen over and over and over again, it claims that it has a 97% accuracy rate of detecting gunshots. There's just, I don't believe it. None of the research I've ever seen backs that up. Can you talk a bit about like what it's actually detecting versus what they sort of claim it is?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess the overreaching kind of theme here is we just don't know. ShotSpotter is very not transparent about their data. There have been really no peer-reviewed independent studies of the technology. So when we talk about, you know, how effective it is, that is a claim that ShotSpotter makes based off of, you know, very little information given to the public about it. You know, and that's kind of the big issue is when you start getting down into the nitty gritty of like what's actually going on, you notice that a lot of the times what they consider a gunshot, police will investigate and find out it was a firework, which if you live in, you know, I use Pasadena because it's next to me out here in LA, you know, fireworks are kind of how we celebrate, and it's a different kind of language out here, you know, fireworks happen all the time. So once you start getting into looking at some of the data that I have been able to get, you start seeing that, you know, maybe they claim it was a gunshot, but when police show up, they don't find any evidence of a gun crime. And sometimes they find out it was a car backfiring or construction equipment and all of that. And that just kind of shows, you know, their claim that it's effective at identifying gunshots is, you know, very questionable to make that claim.
Yeah, and you know, their 97, like the 97% figure that they cite in their marketing material is based on police reporting back to ShotSpotter that there was a mistake, right? Like for ShotSpotter to count to count like a gunshot or to count a sound as an error, the police have to report it back to ShotSpotter, right? So it's almost like by default, if they hear nothing, they have 100% accuracy rate. But the second that, you know, they're informed of this, they, you know, will adjust that rate.
Well, and also, I mean, that's a metric that relies on the cops telling them, like, it relies on the cops taking an extra step in an investigation. And these are like, you are dealing with one of the most notoriously lazy group of people like in the entire country. Like I have watched these people on duty in Chicago. They spend like 80% of their time standing around on their phones playing Candy Crush, right? Like this entire data statistics thing requires them to do another step. And it's like what percentage of the time is a cop going to admit that they ran out to this thing and like drew their guns and were doing their like whole, there's been gunshots thing, and then there's just nothing there. And it's like, I don't know. It seems like cast a pall over even this, even the sort of potential that their data can be right.
Right. I mean, we all know that cops lie.
Yeah.
And we've seen them kind of use ShotSpotter alerts. You know, Chicago was one of the examples where they were using it as cover to make illegal stops and, you know,
yeah,
that sort of thing. So, you know, if there's room for that, it's hard to then take what data police are giving them in this way as accurate. And then again, it goes back to, well, the public doesn't get to see any of that information. So we don't get to make that, I guess, distinction between the two and, you know what's best for people's communities because of that.
That's one of the things about this program that is really alarming, is that you have this mass surveillance technology and the people in charge of it, or like the people who would be in charge of sort of like deciding whether or not you want it, it's like like both the general public and like city mayors, et cetera, seem to have so little information about what it's even doing that it's incredibly difficult to make any kind of sort of database choice. All you have is sort of this combination of like the company going, oh yeah, well obviously our stuff works, and then this sort of, this is the thing that's been happening in Chicago, is this sort of like crime panic stuff that people just fall back on, and they combine this sort of crime panic with just the assumption that it works because that's what it says in the box, and that's I think a really alarming combination to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that city council members are kept in the dark about the locations of these things, as are the police departments who pay for or the cities who pay for it. I think it's something that's really been quite interesting after we published is that I've gotten a bunch of emails from city council members asking me if I can provide them data about the locations because they can't even get them from the company, right? So there's a lot of transparency issues here.
Yeah, and this is this is a tool being paid with public money. Another thing we found in the data was that there are a list of sensors that are broken or out of service or anything like that. In talking to various police departments, ShotSpotter doesn't let them know when that happens, and referred us to ask the ShotSpotter about that. So, not even the functionality of like how many sensors are down are really communicated. And that's a huge problem. But like, again, this data, as a journalist to investigate it, to request documents, I can count at least 3 separate cities where ShotSpotter intervened and said the release of the data would be a trade secret. And so therefore, So like, even any data that shows transparency of like anything more detailed than just an alert that many cities have, ShotSpotter won't release because it is quote unquote a trade secret. Mind you, I have gotten documents from other cities that are more detailed. And then when I request those from other cities, ShotSpotter intervenes and goes, no, that's a trade secret. So it's this kind of trying to hide the transparency that then adds more skepticism to the effectiveness and usefulness of the product, which the public, I believe everyone would agree, deserves a right to know, especially if it's taxpayer money.
Yeah, and it's a lot of money too. So speaking of a lot of money, unfortunately, we have to take an ad break. So we will be back in a second. Okay, we are back. Something I wanted to talk about with the way that these sensors are used. So I should have actually figured out the exact date after which the story originally came out, but maybe like 4 or 5 days after your story came out, there was a story that came out of Chicago about a sort of effectively the cover-up of a case where CPD was responding to a ShotSpotter ping, and it was just like a 13-year-old kid shooting off fireworks, and the cop showed up and immediately started shooting, and like thankfully cops can't set up a barn, so the kid didn't get shot, but like this child had a cop shoot at him while the kid was like running towards the cop going, no, it was fireworks. Yeah, so I was wondering what kind, like, how many of those kinds of stories did you run into when you were sort of like running into this story, and yeah, what has the impact of that stuff sort of been?
I think that example you bring up is particularly egregious, but what happens more often, I think, are these there's sort of like less dramatic events where Sound Thinking or ShotSpotter will detect 2 shots and deploy cops to a corner, and they'll detain someone on the scene, run their name through their their databases, and find that this guy's got a bench warrant, or pick someone up on a misdemeanor, right? So like, I think while there are some really egregious examples, the thing that I think about a lot here is just how much how many unnecessary arrests are happening because of ShotSpotter, right? How many people are being picked up on bullshit, essentially.
Yeah, and that recent case in Chicago with the kid with the firework, and it wasn't too long ago that Adam Toledo was shot.
Yeah,
a 13-year-old kid. For the same reason, cops were responding to a ShotSpotter alert, and the Chicago OIG in their report about it kind of highlighted one of the things, which is cops are just primed to be, expecting, gunfire, or somebody shooting at them and everything. And, I think that is a danger, but again, to what Drev's saying is like, it also leads to a lot of unnecessary stops. It opens up people to be profiled and patted down. And, so both options are not great, when you consider the harm that this causes. It's just, we all know that like cops are very jumpy to begin with. So, they hear a firework or, an acorn hits their cop car or something. We all know that like, that's probably not what we need police to be expecting on a call. And so you're just telling people, oh, gunshots, and then they're going to run in expecting to be fired upon. And I don't think that's great for society.
Garrison, do you want to talk a bit about that?
I don't know if there's much more to say. I think
that's true. We did do a lot of Acorn Cop.
I think the Acorn incident stands on itself. I don't think it needs to even be talked about. I think
Okay.
I think one sentence is speaks a whole book's worth of possible analysis of police behavior. And being the notion of police rushing into every situation thinking that there was a gunshot obviously has its inherent problems.
Now, like, mind you, a lot of the times, and at least in other cities, it's 60 to 80% of the time they don't find anything.
Yes.
Which I think is good in the sense that nobody's being harmed or stopped, but it's also bad when you consider the effectiveness and utility of the device, which ShotSpotter has kind of distanced themselves from, this idea of preventing gun crime or lowering gun crime, and more in terms of like safety and arriving to a scene quicker to render aid and help police find shell casings. You've seen over the years the kind of switch of focus on what the technology does. And that most certainly happened around the time they changed their name to Sound Thinking. Yeah.
I think, the other thing I wanted to mention here is that, from a different leaked internal report from the state's attorney's office in Cook County, Illinois, it found that like a third of arrests stemming from a ShotSpotter alert actually had nothing to do with the gun in the first place. So it's not even like, their 89% of alerts don't, result in finding a shell casing. It's that even when there are arrests that occur from a ShotSpotter alert, 30% of them have nothing to do with the gun, right? And that just shows you sort of the criminalization of of people in areas that have these microphones.
Yeah, and I think the combination of those two things gets you to this point about ShotSpotter's effectiveness, which is that like, okay, so we've had ShotSpotter for a while in Chicago, right? Chicago police do not solve murders. Like their murder clearance rate, and you have to keep in mind that murder clearance doesn't actually mean they solved a murder, but like even that jacked up murder clearance rate, I don't think I think they may have had 1 year in my entire life over 50%, and that was because murder clearance counts. If two people both shoot each other and they both die, that counts as a clearance, or they find their suspect dies in like another way. So it's pretty clear that it's not actually substantively contributing to the Chicago Police Department solving murders. Like, you have a better than coin flip odds if you kill someone in Chicago that like the police aren't even gonna like really try to figure out what happened. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that they've been pivoting away from even claiming that this can do anything to solve gun violence, because it just clearly hasn't at all. And instead it seems to be doing a bunch of other stuff, which is like either throwing cops around chasing like shadows, which either results in them arresting just random people or like having these really sort of terrifying incidents, or it just results in straight up nothing. Yeah, we're going to go to ads. We'll be back in however long capitalism dictates. So see you then. And we're back.
I think, like, looking at the effectiveness, like, two cities that have continued to deny ShotSpotter contracts are Atlanta and Portland. Two cities that spend a lot of time thinking about how they equip their police, spend a lot of time, like, making sure that their police are able to serve the largest amount of the community possible. And the fact that, like, specifically Atlanta, with their massive, like, Flock program of an integrated camera network across the whole city, like, it is one of the most surveilled cities in the country, if not the most. The fact that they are turning down this equipment for it not being effective enough and it being too costly is a sign for, like, beyond it just being a sign, it's also like a look at why other police departments are interested in this and, like, what it allows them to do and being deployed to these various communities that have the 25,000 sensors. But no, I mean, like, they've constantly tried to send this stuff to Atlanta, and it's simply not happening. And even after 2020, Portland's like, no, it's two super useful examples to measure how much this technology actually is going to get used for what they say it's being used for, versus just having an excuse to act like there's gunfire all across the city.
Yeah, and you know, I think when we start, more police departments are going to start relying more on technology.
Sure.
Largely because many departments cannot hire more cops. Now, this isn't advocating me, you know, I don't want police departments to hire more cops, you know, they've slowly defunded themselves in that way. But, like, you know, cities like Los Angeles are trying to grow their surveillance capabilities for that reason. They just do not have enough. They say they do not have enough cops. And so this is where kind of this surveillance capitalism is going to really thrive, is police departments are going to get desperate and they're going to start reaching out and getting more invasive surveillance technology. And, you know, I think in some cities, ShotSpotter is kind of their way of quieting the narratives about, you know, the growing gun violence and everything in their communities. You know, they're like, oh, look, we've deployed this new toy to kind of help us, without really solving anything, because we all know cops aren't really good at solving crime.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives them cover of, like, we're bad at our jobs, so how do we make it look like we're better? Well, let's, you know, invest in some new technology so it looks like we're trying something. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's a waste of money, and then the impacts of that is harm, you know, greater than the good.
Yeah, it's like we're spending an enormous amount of money to hurt people for no reason.
Yeah, and, you know, I think ShotSpotter is only one of Sound Thinking's offerings, right? Like, they, you know, when they changed their name to Sound Thinking, it sort of, like, reflected this pivot in the company where now they were going to start thinking more about, like, resource management, right? How do we convince departments that our technology is going to better help them allocate their resources? And, you know, surveillance is the way to do that. We can measure where crime is, we can measure where gunshots is, and where gunshots are, and we can deploy police there. And one of ShotSpotter, or recently, Sound Thinking had acquired, like, a notorious predictive policing company called Treadpole. That happened, I think, earlier this year. So, you know, they're trying to expand their offerings here to be this kind of resource management solution for departments.
See, Mia, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up here?
Yeah, I guess there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, which is that, so one of the things that I've heard from places that have gotten rid of their contracts is that ShotSpotter's not, like, taking their sensors down, even when cities stop doing contracts. I was wondering what you two sort of know about that.
Yeah, I reached out to Dayton, Ohio, who recently got rid of their contract. And I reached out, you know, because I was, like, asking departments who had it, like, are you aware of the status of the sensors? Do you know the locations? Both no's. And then I asked Dayton, now that the contract's over, what happens to the sensors? And they basically said, we don't know. That's ShotSpotter's responsibility. And their responsibility is maintenance and care and removal and installation. So who knows? Obviously, somebody knows because it's not like some person could just start climbing telephone poles and installing surveillance equipment. So obviously, somebody's issuing permits to install stuff and put stuff up there. But as we're finding out, city council members don't know, police departments don't know. And so who knows what happens to these devices afterwards? And then say a city like Chicago, say they cancel their contracts. Well, a new mayor can come in and then just instantly turn them back on, in that way. And so that's kind of the other thing we're slowly starting to learn here. As more cities start canceling their contracts or not renewing them, it is what happens to the technology afterwards. And we don't know.
Which is not a great sign. It's not good that there's just a bunch of state surveillance technology around all the time, but it somehow feels even worse that we don't have any idea what happens to it, even if the state decides it doesn't want to use it. So, yeah, I guess on that somewhat disquieting note, do you have anything else that you wanted to make sure you get to?
No, nothing from me.
No, I mean, this is, thanks to, somebody brave enough to send us the info, and it's the only way this information has been able to get out. And I think if I implore the public to really research and dig into this technology, if their cities are thinking about extending their contracts or bringing a contract in and really questioning it and trying to get ShotSpotter on the record to answer for some of these things. And, we know what works and what doesn't work. And I think most cities are starting to find out that there is a better use of that amount of money to stop these sort of gun crimes, interventions, and other more community-based solutions rather than just dumping money into surveillance technology. And, you can get a lot done with an $8 million.
Yeah.
It's just like there's always money in the banana stand sort of thing. There's always money for police. So it's just why don't we just retransform that money into things that actually work in these communities and, go behind that. So.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, hopefully this will encourage more cities to stop paying for this shit. Yeah. So where can people find YouTube's work? I mean, I know obviously this one's on Wired, but are online places, et cetera, social media places, plug yourself, go. Yay.
Well, you can find my stuff on wired.com, and I'm on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it at DMero, and on Blue Sky at DMero, DMEHRO.
And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter with the username Joey Never Joe. And then my writings have been in local press out here in LA Public Press, and Knock LA.
Yeah, and thank you to you both so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm going to encourage everyone else to go get your city to not use this stuff because it sucks. All right, this has been It Could Happen Here. You can find us in the usual places. Goodbye.
Life gets messy. Spills, stains, pet accidents, and kid chaos. But with Anabei, cleaning up is easy. Our sofas are fully machine washable, inside and out, so you never have to stress about messes again. Made with liquid and stain-resistant fabrics, that means fewer stains and more peace of mind. Designed for real life, our sofas feature changeable fabric covers, allowing you to refresh your style anytime. Need flexibility? Our modular design lets you rearrange your sofa effortlessly. Perfect for cozy apartments or spacious homes. Plus, they're earth-friendly and built to last. That's why over 200,000 happy customers have made the switch. Upgrade your space today. Sofas start at just $699. Visit washablesofas.com now and bring home a sofa made for life. That's washablesofas.com. Offers are subject to change and certain restrictions may apply.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Let's talk about modern home shopping. It's sort of become a fun side hobby, right? Scrolling listings at night, dreaming about kitchens you've never seen, or backyards you haven't even stepped foot in, all from the comfort of pretty much anywhere. Redfin knows a lot of people like you want to own, but are stuck in this browsing mode loop. That's where Redfin flips the script. With listings that update within minutes and tours you can book right from the Redfin app, you can see your dream home the moment it appears. Now, liking a listing is easy, but actually landing it, that's where Redfin comes in. Redfin has over 2,200 agents with local expertise. And Redfin agents close twice as many deals as other agents. That means they want to help you win, not just window shop. Redfin is built to help you go from just looking to wait, this could actually be home. So become the newest neighbor on the block. Visit redfin.com to start finding and start owning. That's redfin.com.
Hello and welcome to It Could Happen Here. This is Shireen, and today we are talking about, you guessed it, Palestine. I'm also going to keep talking about Palestine because there has been a genocide happening for the past 5 months and also 76 years, and I refuse to let it be forgotten about, and I refuse to let it be something that we used to talk about, because it's happening right now, and we need to talk about it. So here I am, talking about it. And while being a public supporter of Palestine has never been popular in the United States, since October we've seen a significant increase in the silencing of Palestinian and pro-Palestinian voices. And this is happening both online and offline. But let's first start with the digital sphere, where the censorship of Palestinian voices and pro-Palestinian content can have really dangerous consequences, especially since the vast majority of us consume our news via social media these days. Meta, for example, has a long history of systematically censoring Palestine-related content. While the company has stated that it's, quote, never their intention to suppress a particular community or point of view, Access Now conducted a report where their documentation points to the opposite conclusion. The information in this episode, when it comes to Meta in particular, will be from the findings of Access Now in their report, because I don't think the report got the attention it deserved when it was published on February 19th. Denying the public from both expressing and seeing content supporting Palestine is a very dangerous game that only further bolsters Israeli propaganda as well as silences any criticism against the settler colony of Israel. This is not okay. And it should concern you, because you have the right to know the truth. This pattern of censorship is no glitch. Soon after Israel began bombarding Gaza and blatantly committing genocide last October, Palestinians and people sharing pro-Palestinian messages began to report that their content was being censored and suppressed on social media platforms, including on Facebook and Instagram. The platforms restricted and sometimes even suspended the accounts of Palestinian journalists and activists both inside and outside of Gaza, and arbitrarily deleted a considerable amount of content, including documentation of atrocities and human rights abuses committed by Israel against the Palestinian people. Examples of this online censorship show that it is rampant, systematic, and global. For instance, Human Rights Watch has documented 1,050 cases of peaceful content expressing support for Palestine, originating from more than 60 countries around the world, being removed between October and November 2023. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Observatory for Digital Rights Violations has documented around 1,043 instances of censorship between October 7th of 2023 and February 9th of this year, including on Facebook and Instagram. From content removals to very blatant restrictions, the following examples illustrate the main patterns of censorship on Meta's platforms documented since October 7th, 2023. Our first example is Facebook's removal of content that was documenting the explosion at Al Ahli Arab Hospital. It removed content shared by people who were on the ground during the massacre and during the bombing. The automatic deletion of bystander content with evidentiary value, especially during times of war, not only violates people's ability to express themselves and freely access information, it also hinders current and future investigations into alleged war crimes and atrocities perpetrated in Gaza by Israel, funded by the United States. There have also been suspensions of prominent Palestinian and Palestine-related accounts. Meta has banned and suspended scores of accounts that posted content about Palestine. For instance, on October 10th, 2023, Mondaweiss reported that Instagram had twice suspended the account of Leila Warrah, its West Bank video correspondent. It was only after Mondaweiss publicized the suspension that the platform quickly reinstated her account. Meta also suspended the account of Gaza journalist and photographer Motaz Azaiza, who gained more than 18.6 million followers for reporting on the genocide in Gaza. This forced him to create a new backup account under @MotaGaza, which acquired more than 1 million followers within 24 hours. Meta later did reinstate Motaz's original account, but several of Azaiza's posts showing dead or injured Palestinians were flagged by Instagram for possibly violating its policy on adult nudity and sexual activity. Under its DOI policy, which stands for Dangerous Organizations and Individuals, Meta also permanently banned the Arabic and English language Facebook pages of Quds News Network, the largest and entirely volunteer-run Palestinian news outlet, which has over 10 million followers on Facebook. Other news outlets that Meta has temporarily suspended or banned include Aijal Radio Network, Breakthrough News, 24FM, and Palestinian Refugees Portal. In addition, Palestinian journalists Fatin Alwan, Saleh Al-Jafarawi, and Ahmed Shihab Al-Din have all experienced and continue to experience content takedowns and account restrictions on Instagram and Facebook. There have also been numerous examples of restrictions on pro-Palestinian users and content. Here are some examples. Meta blocked Jerusalem-based activist Adnan Berk from live streaming on Instagram. It restricted Jewish American artist and author Molly Crabapple's Instagram account. And there have also been documented cases of Meta hiding Instagram comments that contain the Palestinian flag emoji for being, quote, potentially offensive. Many people have reported being barred from commenting on Instagram posts containing Palestine-related content. One user said that a comment was blocked for over 24 hours without explanation. People have also reported being unable to repost or reshare content related to Palestine in their Instagram stories. In addition to the usual screening that Meta imposes on graphic or violent content, Meta imposed a, quote, sensitive content warning before users could reshare Palestine-related posts via their Instagram stories. In some instances, attempts to reshare such content generated a blank page and a message stating that, quote, something went wrong. Following the Al Ahli Arab Hospital massacre, people reported being unable to reshare a video report that was criticizing Western media coverage of the bombing, either via their direct messages or Instagram stories. This video report was conducted by a Lebanese media outlet called Megaphone. Meta has also repeatedly discouraged users from following or sharing content from popular Palestinian accounts that were sharing updates on Gaza, in the form of prompts saying, quote, are you sure you want to follow or mention this account? And warnings that certain accounts have, quote, repeatedly posted false information or violated Meta's community guidelines. In perhaps the most disturbing incident, and one that I will never forget, and I hope you don't either, and if you haven't heard about this, buckle up. Instagram repeatedly auto-translated the word Palestinian, or instances of the Palestinian flag, used alongside the Arabic phrase Alhamdulillah, which means praise be to God, on people's bios. Alhamdulillah, by the way, is an extremely innocent phrase that is used by all people that speak Arabic, essentially, and it's said all the time. It's a very peaceful, calming thing to say. Alhamdulillah, thank you, God. But guess what they translated this into? Instagram translated the word Palestinian, the use of the Palestinian flag, along with Alhamdulillah in people's bios, into Palestinian terrorists are fighting for their freedom. Palestinian terrorists are fighting for their freedom. Are you fucking kidding me? When a TikTok user uncovered this disturbing pattern, Meta apologized and fixed the issue. And we all moved on. One of the most insidious ways that Palestinian and pro-Palestinian voices are being censored and suppressed on Meta's platforms is via the restriction of certain accounts' reach and visibility without any explanation or notification, aka shadow banning. For example, following the Lebanese media outlet Megaphone's coverage of the Al-Ahli Arab Hospital attack, its Instagram account, @Megaphone News, was hidden from search results. Evidence also suggests that on October 8th, 2023, Meta hid Instagram content that included the hashtag Al-Aqsa Flood from view. Meta's censorship of Palestinian voices and Palestinian-related content is far from new. In recent years, however, it has become increasingly pronounced, with a well-documented pattern of systematic censorship, algorithmic bias, and discriminatory content moderation emerging. During the 2021 Sheikh Jarrah protests, social media content expressing support for Palestinian rights was deleted, removed, and shadow banned, while users who were sharing such content were suspended or prevented from commenting or live streaming, and pro-Palestinian hashtags were suppressed. These were all serious problems that Meta brushed off as, quote, a technical issue. Let's take a little breather, and when we come back, we'll talk about silencing that is outside of the digital world. So, BRB. Okay, we're back. In addition to digital silencing, we have seen cases of silencing occurring offline, as Americans are being fired or facing threats for speaking out in support of Palestine. An open letter published in Artforum on October 19th declared, "We support Palestinian liberation and call for an end to the killing and harming of all civilians." It was signed by thousands of artists, scholars, and cultural workers, including the Art World magazine's editor, David Velasco. A week later, Velasco was fired from the publication that he had worked at for 18 years, reportedly after pushback from Martin Eisenberg, a major arts patron and Bed Bath & Beyond heir. Wow. At least 4 Artforum editors have resigned in protest against Velasco's firing. And many, many more people have lost their jobs. Just a few quick examples. A Philadelphia sports writer was fired after tweeting, quote, solidarity with Palestine in criticism of a 76ers post that offered support to Israel after Hamas's attack. In another high-profile incident, a University of California, Berkeley professor was sacked as editor-in-chief of the scientific journal eLife after he retweeted an Onion article that he said, quote, calls out indifference to the lives of Palestinian civilians. A spokesperson for Palestine Legal, a civil rights group, says it has responded to more than 260 incidents of suppression against Palestinian rights activists over 2 weeks of October, more than it did in all of 2022. The Council on American Islamic Relations, also CAIR or CAIR, which is a civil rights nonprofit, says it received 774 complaints between October 7th and October 24th, which was the largest wave of complaints that it's handled since Donald Trump announced his Muslim ban in 2015. This wave has targeted professional activists as well as ordinary people who have spoken in defense of Palestinians. It has reportedly also escalated into death threats, as well as assaults and visits from the FBI, to Muslim individuals and mosques. In surprise to absolutely no one, in the United States, the highest levels of power have long supported voices backing Israel and its military. In the words of Justin Sadowski, an attorney at CARE, the swift blowback against pro-Palestinian voices builds on decades of organized efforts to, quote, tar Palestinian rights speech as pro-terrorist or anti-Semitic. The late civil rights attorney Michael Ratner called this the, quote, Palestine exception to free speech. In 2015, CCR and Palestine Legal published a report on the tactics used by pro-Israel lobbying groups, school administrators, and public officials to shut down Palestinian rights activists. They included false accusations of anti-Semitism or support for terrorism, as well as legal threats and criminal investigations, and they often succeeded in intimidating or deterring Palestinian solidarity activists from speaking out. And again, this pattern of silencing is not new. The prominent Palestinian American scholar Rashid Khalidi recalls feeling overwhelmingly outnumbered at Columbia University in 2003 when pro-Israel advocates protested against him and other faculty as well as students who spoke out against Israel amid intense fighting in Gaza and the West Bank. News crews hounded him on campus, and pro-Israel students even made a documentary about the controversy. Khalidi says, I think the narrative was pretty firmly in the hands of people who supported Israel. But, he continued, there is a generational change taking place, with young people having an entirely different set of views. They consume different media, and I think they're more educated, more worldly, and better informed than their elders. The recent laws against the boycotting of Israel in particular, which 36 states have enacted, directly stifle political advocacy by making people choose between their livelihoods and their First Amendment rights. Last year, the Jewish American scholar Nathan Thrall announced that he had been disinvited from speaking at the University of Arkansas for refusing to sign an anti-boycott pledge that was required of public contractors by state law. Maybe after all this, you're asking yourself, so what do we do now? We do exactly what they don't want us to do, exactly what they're afraid of us doing, exactly what they're trying to deter us from doing. Continue talking about Palestine and sharing news and images and information that exposes Israel's crime of genocide against the Palestinian people. The same way people say to vote with your dollar when it comes to boycotting certain brands and choosing where your money goes, you can decide how you want to use your social media platforms. What do you want to do with your digital presence? What do you stand for? Personally, I think the days of casually and incessantly posting about your life are behind us, or at least we're headed in that direction. We're utilizing social media in a different way now. Seeing how Gen Z has utilized TikTok to share information is a great example of that. I don't think celebrity culture, unfortunately, will ever completely go away on social media, but I do think we are demanding more of our celebrities now. And I think especially as we're seeing quote-unquote trusted news sources peddle disinformation and propaganda in an irresponsible and appalling way, to put it very lightly, we are relying on each other to share real information, and in this case, our resources are coming from the people who are directly experiencing the horrors of genocide for the past 5 months and 76 years. And those voices must be amplified. There are a lot of solid arguments to be made against social media as a whole when it comes to whether or not it benefits humanity. But I am seeing something shift now, where we are able to utilize this tool for our betterment. If it wasn't for social media, the movement for Palestinian liberation would not be where it is today. People who were previously uninformed would never have seen the reality of the situation, were it not for our ability to learn from each other outside of the limitations of mainstream news. We are learning to trust the establishment less and trust each other more. And I think if we're able to use social media in this way, it's actually a net positive for us. It doesn't have to be empty and mind-numbing and a way to control us or get us to spend our money to keep the capitalism machine in good working order. We can decide how we utilize our digital presence and the good that can come from it. And to be united in this way is extremely powerful, and it can ignite real change. And at the very least, it can be our way of spiting the powers that be and refusing to be sheep. Existing in an age of mass surveillance is frankly very terrifying, but seeing the lengths that companies like Meta will not only go to surveil us, but to monitor what we consume, it's extremely revealing of how weak their power actually is. It's up to us to take back that power, especially now as we are witnessing a genocide happen in real time on our silly little devices for the past 5 months, and having people become aware of the slower genocide and ethnic cleansing that has taken place for 76 years. So keep talking about Palestine, both in person with your peers and family and online. I can't guarantee that you won't face pushback or repercussions, because as we know, that is a real possibility. But the community of people that you gain from learning of and speaking the truth far outweighs any individual fear. And I would rather stand for something than cower by myself or be controlled by fear. We do have the ability to change things. I have to believe that something else is possible. But it starts with taking the blinders off and making a choice about how you want to utilize the tools at your disposal, rather than be utilized yourself. And that, my friends, is our episode for today. Thank you so much for listening, and Free Palestine.
Kids, pets, life, your sofa sees it all. But with a washable sofa, stains don't stand a chance. All of our sofa collections come with fully machine washable covers and cushions, making cleanup effortless. Liquid and stain-resistant fabrics provide extra protection against everyday messes. Plus, with modular designs, you can rearrange your sofa however you like. Perfect for growing families and changing spaces. Starting at just $699, it's time to upgrade to a stress-free, mess-proof sofa. Visit washablesofas.com today and save. Offers are subject to change, and certain restrictions may apply.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Let's talk about modern home shopping. It's sort of become a fun side hobby, right? Scrolling listings at night, dreaming about kitchens you've never seen, or backyards you haven't even stepped foot in, all from the comfort of pretty much anywhere. Redfin knows a lot of people like you want to own, but are stuck in this browsing mode loop. That's where Redfin flips the script. With listings that update within minutes and tours you can book right from the Redfin app, you can see your dream home the moment it appears. Now, liking a listing is easy, but actually landing it, that's where Redfin comes in. Redfin has over 2,200 agents with local expertise. And Redfin agents close twice as many deals as other agents. That means they want to help you win, not just window shop. Redfin is built to help you go from just looking to wait, this could actually be home. So become the newest neighbor on the block. Visit redfin.com to start finding and start owning. That's redfin.com.
Hello and welcome back to It Could Happen Here. I am once again your guest host, Molly Conger. Joining me today is our friend Garrison.
Hello! Excited to get the Robert Rundo rundown.
So you already know what we are talking about today. It is a guy that you probably already know more about than you ever wanted to. It is Rob Rundo, the founder of the Nazi Fight Club, the Rise Above movement. You and Robert did a great two-part Behind the Bastards on RAM back in 2021.
Which is shockingly 3 years ago, which does not sound right, but I guess is the case.
It's been a long 3 years for you, but an even stranger one for Rob. He's been really
country hopping a lot the past few years, huh?
He's been busy. So when you recorded that episode back in January of 2021, Rundo's federal charges had been dismissed by Judge Cormac Carney in 2019. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned that decision in March 2021, right around the time the episode came out. I think at the end of the second episode, you had a postscript, like an addendum you recorded afterwards, because before it came out, the Ninth Circuit ruling had been issued.
Okay.
But in an almost comical turn of events, Judge Carney has once again dismissed those charges 2 weeks ago now. So
3 years later, a few countries later, hopping from Serbia to the United States to probably other places around Europe. Yeah.
And we're sort of back in the same position you were in when you talked about him 3 years ago.
Time is a flat circle.
But before we get into one of the sort of strangest legal slap fights I've ever read, let's back up for a second. Who is Rob Rundo and what was he charged with?
Yeah.
So if you want a more robust look at the early days of the Rise Above movement, I do recommend going back and listening to that Behind the Bastards two-parter on the Rise Above movement. It originally aired in March 2021, so like really scroll back in your podcast app. But we'll do a quick recap here because it's not, I can't assign the listener homework, so. So the Rise Above movement first emerged in early 2017 after a brief period of being called the DIY division. Both stupid names, I don't know which one's better. But RAM, we're just going to call them RAM. And 2017 was a big year for political violence. It was really hot that year. The group was, on its surface, a mixed martial arts club for white men. They trained together and bonded over their shared and abhorrent political views. In their own words, they are fighting against the modern world corrupted by the destructive cultural influences of liberals, Jews, Muslims, and immigrants. You know.
And gay people.
And gay people, yeah. Just pretty much everybody except, themselves.
Except Rob Rundo. Yeah, essentially.
If you are not a member of the Nazi Fight Club, you are a victim of the Nazi Fight Club.
That's the first rule of the Nazi Fight Club. Sure, whatever. Okay.
The first rule of Nazi Fight Club was not don't talk about Nazi Fight Club. And I think that's
because they can't shut up about it. They cannot stop talking.
Like, if they had just followed the first rule of Fight Club, they might not be in this position. But RAM quickly became a staple at rallies in Southern California that year. In the spring and summer of 2017, they kept showing up and kept throwing punches. In March, members assaulted journalists and counter-protesters at a MAGA rally in Huntington Beach. In April, they assaulted numerous counter-protesters at a rally in Berkeley. In August, RAM members attended Unite the Right in Charlottesville and assaulted counter-protesters in the streets again. And, they're not just going to these events and getting in fights, right? They're not just like showing up and just like it just happens. They're going to these events, planning on committing these assaults, and then bragging about the assaults publicly and privately. They're using these acts of violence as propaganda and recruitment tools, right? Like they're making little videos, they're posting about it. It's not just about committing the assault. So the violence is not just about physically hurting people. It's part of a larger strategy to incite others to join them in this project. And that's, you already know this. You covered that in your episode 3 years ago. This is for everybody else.
And they're still going. Unfortunately, these they're now often called active clubs, are more popular than what they were 3 years ago. They've become a very big staple of white supremacist organizing across the United States and Canada, mirroring a lot of organizational styles in Eastern Europe. There's probably one in your area that you might not know about. They are active on Telegram. They're actively recruiting. They recruit from high schools. It is a big increasing problem as Patriot Front becomes more and more like Fed-jacketed between their own Nazi ranks. We see more people plugging into these active clubs. And
right. RAM did not go away. It just sort of morphed. And so back in 2017, they said they had a lot of members. They probably had like 20, but now these active clubs they do genuinely have chapters all over the country.
Yeah.
But back in the past, right? So after Unite the Right, RAM members decided to lay off the rallies a little bit, being seen on camera, beating a woman into the pavement at a rally that ended in a hate crime murder, invited some bad press, and they weren't looking to get door knocks at that particular moment. So they backed off a little bit at the end of 2017. But they'd spent most of that year attending rallies and getting into physical altercations. It wasn't until over a year after Unite the Right, in October of 2018, that there was any attempt to do anything about this very obvious problem. The criminal complaint itself even says that some of these assaults were committed in plain view of cops who just stood there and did nothing while these guys beat the shit out of people in the streets. They're in each other's DMs, bragging about kicking a woman in the head while she's lying on the ground, but nobody lifted a finger to stop them. But in October of 2018, 2 cases were filed. One in the Western District of Virginia. Charges were filed against Ben Daly, Cole White, Thomas Gillen, and Michael Macelis. And a few weeks later, in the Central District of California, charges were filed against Rob Rundo, Robert Bowman, Tyler Laub, and Aaron Eason. So all 8 of them, 4 in each district, all 8 of them were charged under the Federal Riot Act and conspiracy to riot. I think it was Robert who said in the original Ram episode, if at any point early on, if at any point in those first few months of this happening, there had been any kind of intervention, if anyone had been arrested in the act, maybe this could have been nipped in the bud, and a lot of what happens later wouldn't have happened.
Or even if they were beaten up, if a group of anti-fascists beat them up, that would disincentivize them from going to future events to try to beat up other people, right? Violence is actually very good at doing this specific thing. If you feel like you're going to go somewhere to get beaten up, you probably don't want to go there. And even divorce from the actions of the state, that is a demotivating factor, which has been effective against Proud Boys in Portland. Now, obviously, some of these guys, especially the Ram crew, go there with the express interest of getting into fights. So that's something you should definitely consider. But yeah, if as long as they have a bad time, it makes them not want to come to these things. But when they're able to just beat up anyone they want to without any pushback, it's it becomes a fun thing. It becomes a large amount of incentive is gained for going to a rally, whether that's in Huntington Beach or halfway across the country.
Yeah, they were having a great time, and there was no movement to stop this. And it's hard to know why it took over a year for any charges to get brought. I think you speculated in that Ram episode a few years ago that it was public pressure after that in-depth reporting came out in mainstream press. But I was going back over the timeline, and that ProPublica piece came out in October 2017. That was just 2 months after Unite the Right and a whole year before those charges were filed. It's not really possible to know why they waited so long unless some, young U.S. attorney wants to level with us about it, but I don't foresee that.
Probably not.
Just, what's going on behind the scenes, buddy? But I do have one sort of interesting little anecdote. A couple months ago, I was at an event here in Charlottesville. It was a panel discussion, and one of the speakers was the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Virginia, Chris Kavanaugh. He was speaking to a group of people about the work that he does, and he was talking about the work that he did on some of these sort of extremism cases after Unite the Right. Back in 2018, he was the assistant U.S. attorney here. He's been promoted since then. But he worked on the James Fields case, and he worked on the Ram case that was filed here in Virginia. And he said something really interesting that I hadn't thought about before. So right after Unite the Right, in August 2017, a bunch of FBI agents were assigned to, check out what happened here at this mass casualty event, right? They had the resources to investigate and try to develop cases. I love my documents. I spent a lot of time in the documents. So I've actually seen, they got some federal search warrants. It was actually an FBI agent who dug the round that Richard Preston fired at Corey Long out of the mulch in Market Street Park. They got search warrants for social media for a couple of guys who ended up prosecuted locally. Alex Ramos, Richard Preston, Daniel Borden. So it looks like they were trying to develop hate crime cases, right? That federal warrant they got for Richard Preston's Twitter account said that they were developing a hate crime case. And they never did. So right after Unite the Right, they're getting these warrants, they're developing these cases. But back to that event that I was at with Chris Kavanaugh, the U.S. attorney, he said when the Las Vegas shooting happened in October of 2017, they lost their task force. They had this huge volume of agents working, trying to develop Unite the Right cases. When that shooting happened 2 months later, they all got reassigned. He was left with a skeleton crew, and they just didn't have the resources to develop these cases. I don't know how the FBI is managing their resources internally so badly that they can only handle one mass casualty event at a time, or why the Washington field office was so heavily impacted by a shooting in Nevada. But that is what he said, so take that as you will. And I think that theory is at least in part supported by the fact that the federal charges against James Fields didn't get brought until June of 2018, right? He'd been charged locally for the car attack that killed Heather Heyer, but the federal charges didn't pop up until June of 2018. So I don't know if maybe something shifted in terms of resources in their office that summer. I don't know. It's interesting to think about. But then, so back to October of 2018, right, when these two different RAM cases get filed. Virginia's case was actually filed first. It was filed a few weeks before the case in California. So I don't know. I assume they were in communication about that, but I don't have any special insight into what their federal prosecutor was doing. But it's also possible that it just takes the government a whole ass year to do anything, no matter what, right? In a recent filing in the Rundo case, the government's talking about how this investigation was developed, and it says, you're going to shit a brick, Garrison. It says that the FBI investigation into RAM only started when a bartender in LA called the FBI a few weeks after Unite the Right because he overheard a patron, Ben Daly, quote, gleefully bragging about having caused havoc during the riots.
Amazing.
And he also, quote, bragged about hitting a guy and punching a girl in the face during protests in Berkeley. So that first comment was about Charlottesville. He had just come home from Charlottesville. He was talking about how he caused havoc. He's bragging about punching people in Berkeley. And the bartender's like, that's suspicious. That's suspicious. This unnamed complainant also told the FBI that Daly and other RAM members had come to the bar often and sometimes used it for recruitment. They were recruiting the patrons at this bar. And based on what he overheard, he told the FBI that the group, quote, did not care about the issues regarding the statues in Charlottesville, but rather, quote, enjoyed going to protests just to raise havoc, cause trouble, and fight. So it wasn't until a bartender called the FBI to be like, hey, this guy's talking about like doing a lot of gang violence. I don't know if you guys know about this. And according to that same court filing, the FBI took until January of 2018, so a few weeks after Unite the Right, maybe we're looking at September. It took them 3 or 4 more months until January of 2018 to discover in the course of their investigation that RAM was based in Southern California.
Great work, everybody. Fantastic stuff.
They're on it now, Garrison. And so at this point, the LA field office opens an investigation into members in the area. Now, I kind of hope this isn't true, right? Like, I hope that this is not a correct summary of these events, because if it really took someone calling the FBI to say like, hey, I heard a guy bragging about doing crime in September.
That definitely happened. No, that is definitely how this went down. Absolutely. That makes so much sense.
But then it took 3 months of investigating to figure out that the guys who recruit for their Nazi gang at a bar in LA probably live in LA.
Yeah. I mean, that is... Like, this is kind of how the FBI investigates white supremacist groups.
But like,
they're too busy investigating teenagers in black hoodies. They can't bother to spare the manpower for this. There's Antifa out there.
By the time they got this tip from the bartender, that ProPublica article was already out. Why did it take them 3 months to find out that the guys whose names were already in the newspaper lived in California? I don't know.
This is why I don't trust anyone who lives in Virginia.
So it took them a few months, right? It took some time. I hope that's not true, but it is what the government has put on the record as the truth. So anyway, that's how this case starts, right? So these 8 members of RAM are charged, 4 in Virginia, 4 in California, with rioting and conspiracy to riot. Just for efficiency's sake, I'll just say that the cases in Virginia are fully resolved. Daly, Missellis, Gillen, and White all pleaded guilty. There were some later unsuccessful appeals where after they saw what happened in the California cases, they were like, actually us too, can we? But that didn't work and their convictions stood, and that's all over.
Where is Daly now? Is he out again?
They're out.
He's out. Yeah.
White didn't get any additional time after his plea because he was so cooperative, and the other 3 all got less than 3 years.
Yeah.
So they're out. But these California cases where Rundo was charged, they have been a mess from day one. So they're charged October 2018. In 2019, Judge Cormac Carney dismissed the charges in California, saying that the Riot Act was unconstitutionally overbroad and its application violated the defendant's First Amendment rights.
So true. First Amendment defender here. That's right. Travel across state lines to riot. Endorsed by this judge.
That's free speech, Garrison. Like, love it or leave it. Go back to Canada. So the prosecutor appealed that ruling because it was hot garbage. And the Ninth Circuit agreed. It takes a long time for things to get appealed. It's like slower than watching grass grow. So the Ninth Circuit reversed that ruling in March of 2021, reinstating the indictments. Things move really. So it took 2 years for them to reverse it and then another year to enter the order. So it wasn't until February of 2022 that the case was formally reopened.
In which case, around this time, Rundo's trying to like hide in Eastern Europe and eventually gets sent back to the United States. Curiously, around the same time that Andrew Tate does. God, imagine an Andrew Tate Rob Rundo fight. Oh, I wouldn't pay money because I don't want to support them, but I would love to watch that.
Actually, send them both back to Romania and let them fight.
Exactly.
So by the time that the California Ram defendants are re-indicted on the original charges, it's January of 2023, and only 3 of them get re-indicted because Aaron Eason has died.
So sad.
It doesn't say much more than that.
Tragic loss of life.
I don't know. I don't want to. I guess I don't want to speculate because it doesn't say on the record, and I was unable to determine. I couldn't find anything other than the court record dismissing his charges because he was dead. I can't find any record of his death. It must have just been, private. But you were talking about it in that Ram episode a couple years ago about how they're all about clean living and fighting.
They're all straight edge except for all of the ones who do drugs.
A lot of them have really serious drug problems, and I don't know for a fact what was going on with Aaron Eason, but I know Robert Bowman had some trouble staying out on bond due to a very severe meth addiction.
Yes.
So I don't know what happened to Aaron Eason, but
very pure. You got to keep the bloodline pure.
So they're re-indicted January 2023. And as you guys talked about back in 2021, Rundo had been living in Serbia for most of this time. He is overseas, making friends, doing Fight Club, doing Nazi stuff, hanging out.
Making bad t-shirts, doing bad graffiti, mostly opening up t-shirt factories. It's really what he spent a lot of his time doing.
It's really about the merch. You have to merchandise.
Hey, if you took away one thing from Revolt Against the Modern World, it's that Ovola loved merch. That's the biggest through line in that work. It's you got to sell those stickers, man.
You have to. It's a sort of a pointy shaped operation, right? The guys on the bottom have to keep selling the stickers to the guys. It has to make new bottoms, right? There is no bottom. It is a pyramid scheme. Patriot Front is a pyramid scheme.
Well, and Patriot Front and Rundo had the same sticker manufacturer for quite a while. Their websites, their merch websites were identical.
Look, how many webmasters can these Nazi groups have? It's got to be one guy.
Yeah.
They do not have a graphic designer. So anyway, he's in Serbia. In 2021, Serbia made a big show of saying he's not welcome here. He's deported to Bosnia. He was still in Serbia. I think Bellingcat has some great articles tracking exactly where in Belgrade Rundo was hanging out. But Serbia was like, no, he's not here. He's not welcome here. He's in Bosnia. Bosnia was like, he's not fucking here. He was in Serbia.
He kept trying to lie to. He kept trying to like make people think he was somewhere else, but he just couldn't stop posting. And if you ever post anything outside or really even inside, you can be found. So he couldn't stop posting, and every single time he'd be like, haha, the CIA assets at Bellingcat think I'm here, when in fact I'm actually over there. And you're like, no, you're actually right here. It's really easy to find out where you are. You posted yourself standing next to this tree. There's only one type of this tree in this area. It's obvious you're right here.
And it's like, you can post if you have terminal posting disease, you can keep posting, but just don't post photographs of yourself in a place.
He can't stop. He can't stop, won't stop. My favorite old Rundo lore is that he had this YouTube series called Tea Time with Robert Rundo that I still think about once a week, where he would give his Nazi followers advice on how to flee the country if they have a felony, while sitting at a European cafe filming on his iPhone. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
In a sane world, evidence like that would make a judge say, I don't think we should let you back out. But
you probably shouldn't be let on bail, considering you made instructions.
So finally, in March of 2023, he's freshly re-indicted in January 2023. March of 2023, the Romanian police are like, we fucking found him. We got him. He's here in Romania. So he's arrested in Romania, and it takes a few months to sort out all the paperwork and get him extradited back to the US in August of 2023. You know what won't get you indicted on federal felony charges that result in you being extradited from a Romanian prison?
Listening to these ads, as long as we declare them, as my FTC training today taught me how to do. So yes, these are all paid advertisements. We're not allowed to call them promoted content. We have to call them ads.
These are advertisements.
I believe that was part of my training today. So to make sure I don't go to prison, enjoy these paid advertisements.
Well, I hope you enjoyed those paid advertisements.
Paid ads. This is we're only airing them because they're paying us money. These are not our sincere belief. We can't really say that either. There's really no way to win. There's no way to win here. Anyway,
I'm going to war against the FTC.
So true.
So that more or less gets us up to the current controversy. So we get Rundo back August 2023, and then in February 2024. About 10 days ago, Judge Carney dismisses the case again. So back in 2019, Carney said, no, there's no crime here. This is just protected First Amendment activities. You can't use the Riot Act. That's unconstitutional, right? And he dismisses the case. And the Ninth Circuit says, no, I don't think so. That's not how we're reading this. You got to take the case back. So it gets remanded back to the same judge. It goes back to Judge Carney, but of course, Rundo's missing now. It takes a while to get him back. And so he finally gets his defendant back from his Nazi lair in Eastern Europe. He has to come up with a new reason why a Nazi street fighting gang shouldn't be charged with a crime. Okay, so it's obvious he just doesn't want to fucking try this case.
Yeah.
So he has to come up with a new reason. And honestly, I think, no shade to the federal public defender, right? Rundo has a public defender. It is their job to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. They are providing zealous defense to their clients. So they write up what I would say, in my personal opinion, was an absolute dog shit motion. And I think maybe they knew that too. I don't know. They're just doing their jobs. I think Judge Carney would have agreed with whatever they put on paper. He gets this motion and he's like, yes, for sure. Dismissed again. So true. And this time it's selective prosecution. That if the government wants to charge Ram with rioting, they would have had to charge Antifa too, because otherwise it's not fair.
Which they do all the fucking time.
It's just not fair.
I mean, this case does actually showcase selective prosecution. The fact that you were super willing to drop charges against a white supremacist, but will send quote unquote Antifa gay teenagers to prison for going to a BLM protest. That actually does show exactly how these cases are very selectively prosecuted.
Right, these guys are playing on easy mode, and as soon as they draw the wrong card, it's well, this deck is stacked. This deck is stacked, right? And so now we talked about this before, Garrison. I'm not a lawyer. We know this. But I am an enthusiastic consumer of the law, and I did read a bunch of law review articles today.
Okay.
Selective prosecution sounds like the kind of thing that could work, right? It's not constitutional to selectively prosecute based on maybe a protected characteristic, right? If you're only prosecuting Black people for a crime, of course that's wrong.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It doesn't work. It never works. This is not an argument that is effective. I won't say it never works. It is generally not an effective argument. Even when a layperson could look at it and say, oh yeah, that is kind of fucked up. It just doesn't work. You can't just walk into court and say, well, Your Honor, I was speeding, but so is everybody else on the interstate. It's unconstitutional to give me a ticket unless everyone gets a ticket, right? That's not how it works.
They're picking on me. It's just, yeah.
You can't just say, other people did what I did, but I'm the only one standing here, so it's not fair. You have to, there's an actual structure to this.
OJ got away with it. That means I should too. Right?
Right. We're not catching every murderer. So I should get a freebie.
Yeah.
So you have to show not only that there was a particular other individual who engaged in the same conduct who was not charged, but also that, quote, a federal prosecutorial policy had a discriminatory effect and it was motivated by a discriminatory purpose. So in the speeding ticket analogy, right, you'd have to say, I was doing 80 in the school zone, but so were these three other particular women, like John, Jane, and Gina were all doing it too. And we all got pulled over, but the cop only gave me a ticket because he hates men or something, right? You'd have to show that.
Based misandrist cop.
Right. Nice. So you'd have to show that other people did the exact same thing you did. And it was possible for them to have gotten in trouble too.
Yeah.
But they didn't because of a particular form of discrimination.
Yeah.
So in order to make a valid claim of selective prosecution, Rundo's lawyers would have to say, look, here's Joe Antifa, a real guy who exists. And here is a materially similar set of circumstances in which Joe Antifa ran an organized group that got into fights on purpose, provoked confrontations, chased people to their cars, beat women in the streets, and then used that footage to recruit people to his gang, right? Like, here's Joe Antifa bragging online about targeting members of a particular minority group for brutal gang assaults at political rallies. Here's his group actively planning and organizing to travel to different cities and other states across the country with the explicit and stated goal of provoking and attacking people, right? You can't just say, well, Antifa didn't get charged. You have to present an actual person who did what you did. Not just some other guy who did something you don't like or somebody else who maybe did kind of a crime. You have to say, this is a specific person and he did what I did in a materially similar way to the same degree that I did it, and with just as much evidence to support that.
Yeah.
And in the Ram case, there's so much evidence because they couldn't stop fucking posting. So they can't produce evidence that Antifa, to whatever degree that's a meaningful term here, engaged in similar behavior to what the evidence shows Ram did, right? It's not just, well, other people were fighting. And in this case, that's kind of preposterous because the evidence does show that they specifically bragged. Like there's a text that was produced from Ben Daly bragging about how they were first through the barricades at Berkeley. So you're acknowledging that, there was this big riot and that you started it. Sure, other people were fighting in the riot that you started on purpose. So no one else can be similarly situated to you because even if they were fighting, you started it. There has to be a real, actual other person who is similarly situated. That's an actual legal term that encompasses a sort of set of criteria. Is there a similar amount of evidence against this other person? Would it take a similar amount of state resources to investigate, arrest, and convict this person? We just don't have an organized militant street gang of Antifa that sold branded apparel and bragged about crimes online. There is no similarly situated, uncharged actor on the other side of this.
Yeah.
There's just, that person doesn't exist. But it's even more than that. Even if we did have Joe Antifa, the gang leader who's bragging online about doing this kind of stuff, even if he existed, even then, there is what's called prosecutorial discretion. There may be reasons that we just aren't entitled to know about as to why a prosecutor made the decisions they did about who gets charged. For a selective prosecution argument to work, you have to show that this decision was made for a discriminatory purpose. And that's really hard to do because they're not going to tell you that, right? In an ideal world, selective prosecution would be an argument raised, about racial bias, because we do know that there is racial bias in who is investigated, arrested, charged, and convicted for crimes. Like at every step along the way, there's a thumb on the scale against people of color. And even then, even when it is so obvious, even when you have, a prosecutor who is a member of the fucking Klan, even then, these arguments don't tend to work. This should not have worked. But Judge Carney clearly just doesn't want this case prosecuted, right? I think it's very obvious that he just thinks Rob Rundo is a nice boy who shouldn't have to go to jail for this. He is also, I think, notably about to retire. He hits the minimum retirement age in May, and he is going to retire the day that he can. I think Megan Cuniff, who has a great blog, Legal Affairs, she's been covering this case. She noted in a tweet a few weeks ago that she knows that he intends to retire because he, in rescheduling some hearings, said that was the only day he could go to the retirement benefits class that he needs to go to make sure he can retire the day he's eligible in May. So he just doesn't want to deal with this, right? That this was scheduled to go to trial in March and he's retiring in May. He just doesn't want to do it.
What's even the point anymore? What's even what is like? I just like why are they even trying here? Like it just kick the can down to someone else if you don't want to deal with this. I don't know. It's turning this whole I don't know. I've read other things from this judge how he's very much into this big Antifa conspiracy theory.
And he's a little bit racist. There was an issue.
I'm shocked.
He was chief judge of the circuit briefly, but he had to step down. So he's still a judge in the Central District of California, but he's not the chief judge anymore because he made a racist comment to the clerk of court. So I think there's some stuff going on with Judge Carney. So I think he knows when he made this ruling that like the Ninth Circuit's going to send it back, but that's not going to be his problem anymore because he's out of here in May. So he heard this like absolute dog shit argument and he was like, so true, King. This is not fair. You are free to go. Go ahead. And he let him out. Same day. Like he heard this argument. He was like, absolutely. That's the one. Go on home. And he let him out that day. The U.S. attorney made a motion for an emergency stay saying like, okay, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why don't we just hang on to him till we can talk to the Ninth Circuit about this? Because I don't know. And that's pretty normal. That would be normal for the judge to say, let's give it a day. I mean, I want him released, but we'll give it a day. We'll let you get your paperwork in order. No, he just let him out. He just let him out right that day. And considering his history of fleeing the country, not the call I would have made.
It is quite the choice.
So the very next day, the Ninth Circuit was like, hold on, let's get him back in custody while we think about this. And it makes no sense for Carney to deny the emergency stay. That would be really normal, to stay the decision until we have a chance to sort of think this through, right? Even if he truly believed with his whole heart that there's no way that this would ever get kicked back by the Ninth Circuit, that the case would stay dismissed and Rundo would be free to go, it would not be unusual to say, you know, well, this has been pretty contentious. The defendant has fled the country multiple times. So let's just hang on to him for 24, 48 hours while we go through the motions of getting that emergency hearing. But that's not what happened. Because Robert Rundo is the definition of a flight risk. Right?
Yes, he is like... He's the platonic, like, ideal form of a flight risk.
I've sat through a lot of bond hearings, and I know we are definitely not all using the same dictionary here when it comes to what is a flight risk, but you really can't find a guy who has done more to demonstrate that he absolutely can and will flee the country to avoid going back to court. He does not want to go to court. So back in 2018, when those two prosecutions were initially filed, right, the Virginia case was filed first. So when Ben Daly was arrested, the charges hadn't actually been filed yet against Rob Rundo. But I guess when they came to get Ben on October 2nd, so 18 days before the charges were filed against Rob Rundo himself, they came to get Ben in LA and he was like, time to get out of Dodge, right? So I think that was the moment he was like, I gotta go. You know, he knew they might be coming for him next. So first he tries going to Ukraine, which is a great place for a militant right-wing extremist to go hang out with friends, right? Yeah. And unfortunately for him, his flight had a layover in London. I don't know if it like didn't occur to him that maybe when they look at your passport, like maybe the US government like anticipated that you would do this. But so Heathrow looks at his passport and was like, the US government says, do not pass go, do not collect $200, do not proceed to Nazi asylum. And they turn him back. Now, mind you, he's not arrested yet, right? They just won't let him go to Ukraine.
Interesting. So he does get to London, though.
I think he gets to London, and they were like, "No, you can't go." I don't know how we got that far.
Yeah, that is intriguing.
So back in California, he walked to Mexico.
Yeah, like which is part of his tea time with Robert Rundo advice.
Right, so like he literally went on foot over the U.S.-Mexico border to avoid passport control, and then he traveled overland through Mexico into El Salvador, where he presumably intended to try getting on a plane again.
You need to get far enough south so that when you fly, you don't cross over American airspace. Other people in RAM have tried this and have not gone far south enough, and their plane crosses over like the tip of U.S. airspace around Florida, and then they get flagged so that when they land, they get like arrested or turned back.
See, that's so tricky. Like I bought a plane ticket. Funny. I bought a plane ticket recently for vacation. I'm not fleeing the country or anything.
Molly's fleeing, everyone.
I actually don't even have a passport. But when you buy a plane ticket, they do not provide for you a sort of schematic of the flight path. So I don't know how they're figuring this out. I guess they're not if it's not working.
Rundo, I think, typically tries to get far enough south that he just gets a direct flight to like somewhere in like the Middle East or Eastern Europe.
Well, I don't know if it would have worked because when he got to El Salvador, the plane that he got on was not headed to Ukraine. It was headed back to LAX in the company of some FBI agents. So they brought him back and he was formally arrested in the LA airport when they brought him back.
Very funny.
Because in the weeks that he had spent trying to get away, the indictment against him had come back and he was also being charged. So after Judge Carney dropped the charges the first time back in 2019, Rundo got his passport back and immediately left the country again, traveling to Europe, visiting other fascist fight clubs. And so, in this time period, the U.S. attorney is appealing the dismissal of the charges. Like they want to bring this case. They're waiting for the Ninth Circuit to hear them, but they're watching him cavorting around Eastern Europe, and they're filing motions saying like, we really got to get him back. Like he's at a Nazi rally in Hungary. He's got a podcast. He's got a podcast where he's telling people how to evade capture by getting foreign passports. Like, we got to get him back. And so when the charges were finally reinstated by the Ninth Circuit in 2021, he'd been formally expelled from Serbia, where he'd been living, and he was eventually arrested in and extradited from Romania. And then when Judge Carney dismissed the charges again 2 weeks ago, and the Ninth Circuit was like, we got to get him back. Do you know where they found him? The Mexican border.
Oh, curious. Who could have predicted? Huh.
So, like, he really loves leaving the country.
Time is a flat circle.
Right. So, Carney lets him out. He tries to leave the country again immediately. The Ninth Circuit says, hold on, let's bring him back. And because the system works in just the most, like, insane imaginable ways, like, I guess when they wrote how this was going to work, they just assumed everyone would act in good faith and they didn't put anything in for when that's not what happens.
I'm pretty sure that's in the Constitution. You have to assume good faith intention. That's I believe, the 69th Amendment. You have to assume good faith.
Everyone's going to be normal about this. We don't need to build in any contingencies here. So every time the Ninth Circuit is like, ooh, Judge Carney, that's nuts, they just have to send it back to him. It doesn't get sent to a different judge. It's just they just keep sending it back to the guy who is bound and determined to ruin this, right? So it gets sent back to Judge Carney. This case is still in front of Judge Carney. So the Ninth Circuit, they put him back in, and Judge Carney's like, I'm going to let him back out. And the Ninth Circuit's like, no, you really can't do that. You really can't do that. And he's being kind of a pissy little baby about this, right? Like, the Ninth Circuit issues an order saying, like, no one can let him out but us. If he gets let out, it will be because we said so. No one can let him out. You can't do it. The Ninth Circuit said so. We're up here. We're on top. We're on top.
This is fascism. This is tyranny. This is fascism, but the bad kind, the kind I don't like. Robert Rundo.
So Carney's on the bench and he's like, well, I really want to, though. And so he issues an order saying, like, he's released, but I'm going to stay my own order. I mean, like, I'm going to enter this order saying he's released, but like it won't go into effect because technically I'm not allowed.
It's such a dorky, like, piss baby tantrum move from a judge.
Like, you're being a real baby, Cormac. He says, quote, I would like to be in a position to release him right now and let him walk out the door. Well, you can't. You can't. So it gets, like, stupid messy here, right? So the Ninth Circuit put him back in, and it comes back to Carney. And Carney's like, well, this arrest wasn't even legal. I should let him out because you couldn't put him back in.
You can't arrest someone without there being cause for a crime.
Well, it is a little bit messy here, right? So Carney argues that Rundo's rearrest wasn't legal because he dismissed the case. So technically, when Rundo was arrested again, there was no charge against him. There is currently, because the indictment was dismissed, the prosecutor's appealing that dismissal. Maybe it'll get reinstated like it did last time. But like right now, he is not charged with a crime.
Which is ridiculous because there's so many other things you could charge him with.
Right, just like find a different crime.
Like there's like between all of his passport stuff, between all of his crossing the border, like there's so much other. There's so many other things that you could decide to charge him with.
Surely some FBI agent has been sort of keeping tabs on his activities and they could come up with something. But as it stands, when he was rearrested, there was no charge, right?
Yeah.
So the Ninth Circuit does have the authority to stay the release order. So Carney issued a release order saying, let him out of jail, right? And so the prosecutor was like, we need an emergency hearing in front of the Ninth Circuit on that release order. So Carney issues the release order. The prosecutor goes to the Ninth Circuit and say, we need you to push the pause button on the implementation of this order. That's really normal. That should have been what happened. But because he was released immediately, before they had a chance to get heard by the Ninth Circuit, Carney's argument, which I think may be true here, right, is that by the time the Ninth Circuit heard the motion to stay the release order, it was moot. They can't hear argument on a motion that doesn't mean anything. You can't stay an order that's already been implemented. So once the release order was carried out and Rundo was no longer physically in custody, there was no order to stay, so the Ninth Circuit had nothing to rule on. So they rearrested him saying, like, we're staying the release order, but the order of operations there is kind of key. At the next hearing, Carney said, I must tell you from the little things I've read, I'm quite concerned. I feel Mr. Rundo is being unconstitutionally detained. And it's messy. And I don't know what the right answer is here, right? Like, it's not unusual for someone to stay in custody pending appeal, especially if they have repeatedly attempted and succeeded at fleeing the country.
Yeah.
And Carney's refusal to stay the release order kind of makes you wonder if he didn't create this procedural nightmare intentionally.
Sure. He kind of created this legal dilemma that now puts Rundo's incarceration in actually like a point of question.
Right, like he had to know that when the Ninth Circuit did hear this motion, they would probably reverse him.
Yeah.
He had to know that. And he absolutely knew Rundo would flee the country before that could happen. And he's not wrong that it looks a little questionable to issue an arrest warrant when there is no live charge, right? The end result that Rundo is in custody pending some kind of further ruling from the Ninth Circuit, that's not weird. That's really normal. But everything that happened in between is a mess. I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, as nuts as Carney is behaving, like, he is probably right that you can't make a ruling on a moot motion and you can't arrest someone who's not charged with a crime. Like, those things are true, but I don't know what the answer is here, and I think it's his fault.
Yeah.
So at this point, right, the government is appealing Carney's dismissal of the charges, just like they did back in 2019. Remember that it took almost 2 years from the original dismissal to the Ninth Circuit ruling reversing and remanding the case in 2021. So this could take a while. At this point, what the government is asking for is a stay of the release order to keep him in custody while they work through this appeals process, because they are appealing the dismissal of the indictment. I don't expect a lot of movement on that this week. I think the docket shows that the appellant's brief is due on the 12th. Today, as we're recording, this is the 4th. So they'll file that brief. They may file more sort of emergency petitions for his release. I'm not sure the Ninth Circuit will do that, but it's anybody's guess at this point, because it's kind of a big mess. The only thing that is clear is that only the Ninth Circuit can let Rob Rundo out.
Well, what an enticing rundo down of the legal events of this case. Don't want to be in that position.
You know, Garrison, I'm not sure that you'll ever be in this position.
I hope not.
At least not in this exact one, unless you're running a secret Nazi gang that I do not know about, in which case, disavow.
Disavow. Okay.
Disavow.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. You should. That's probably the right move.
But so it'll take some time. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what else there is to say.
This is like sort of inciting a lot of active club activity. You were saying earlier that RAM doesn't exist anymore. It's morphed into these active clubs. There's these cells all over the country, and they are fired up about this. So I think this has the potential to incite more political violence.
Or at the very least, incite more t-shirt sales, which would be just as horrifying to see more of those things out in the wild.
Already marketing free Rundo merch.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
I guess even Nazis have constitutional rights.
I guess they do, although it does feel, again, slightly insidious at the selective non-enforcement of some of these things, where there's many people who are being held, especially like in Atlanta, there's been many people being held without bail because they've been deemed a flight risk for a long time for crimes.
And not because they hold like a Serbian passport, you know?
No, just because they attended a music festival.
Right. It's hard to get like super fired up about Rob Rundo's constitutional rights in terms of this sort of like procedural quagmire when it's like people are actively and intentionally violating everyone else's constitutional rights constantly.
Yeah, like the only thing I'm left to think of is how this whole system of law does not seem to work very much. And especially, we often point out how a whole bunch of laws get put in place that are like ostensibly framed to like combat white supremacist terrorism or whatever. And in actuality, really only get used against people fighting for like the rights of black people, people fighting for getting trans people not to be murdered. Like that's really what all these laws get targeted against, and they face so much more harsh punishment because we have a judge who's treating Rob Rundo like a little baby who's this innocent little creature. Meanwhile, people can get constantly locked up for completely bullshit charges in other parts of the country for engaging in like actually like pretty valid acts of protest, not even related to any like alleged violence. Like it's quite frustrating to look at. Yes, there is actually a decent case of selective enforcement here,
and it's the other way around.
Yeah, it is. It is not, in fact, that they're letting Antifa run wild and burn down cities. In fact, these Nazis get treated like little innocent First Amendment defenders as they purposely like talk about and brag about their claims of traveling across the country to assault people and start riots. Anyway, well, that's not great.
Things are not good.
I hope only the worst for Rundo, regardless of whatever legal thing happens. Just like in general, like I wish him bad, just like in life, you know, like I hope he like trips and falls down the stairs, you know, just like in general, like stub his toe really bad.
I'm not optimistic about this situation. Like there are a million outcomes here that are the dumbest possible ending to this story. So I'm not holding my breath for, you know, some brilliant prosecutor to save the day here. But I do hope that that Rob Rundo continues to have a bad day regardless.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this lovely piece of legal research, Molly. I'm glad
now I have to close 87 tabs.
That is always the joy of wrapping up one of these episodes, is closing the ridiculous amount of tabs that are open. Because at any moment in my research process, if any of my friends looks at my computer, they are horrified by the stress that I'm putting my own RAM through. Different RAM
the other RAM
than the computer RAM, not
also under considerable strain at this time.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
right.
I feel like that's as bad enough a joke to end it on as anything else. Where can people find you online, Molly?
Oh gosh, yeah, I am online at Socialist Dog Mom on Twitter, on my newsletter on Ghost, The Devil's Advocates, and I don't know, my dogs have an Instagram that I haven't updated lately. It's at Otto M. Buck. That's it for me. How about you, Garrison?
Oh, you can find me documenting my process of slowly turning my entire apartment into the Black Lodge on Twitter at Hungry Bowtie.
Oh, Jesus Christ! All right.
Well, you can actually see a little bit of it behind me. It's kind of dark, but you can see a glimmer of red curtains.
Yeah, it's spooky back there.
It is quite spooky back there. Wait until I turn on the strobe light.
All right. Thank you for joining me today, Garrison.
All right. Thank you, Molly.
Hey, we'll be back Monday with more episodes every week from now until the heat death of the universe.
It Could Happen Here is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more podcasts from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find sources for It Could Happen Here updated monthly at coolzonemedia.com/sources. Thanks for listening.
Time for a sofa upgrade? Introducing Anabay Sofas, where designer style meets budget-friendly prices. Anabay brings you the ultimate in furniture innovation with a modular design that allows you to rearrange your space effortlessly. Perfect for both small and large spaces, Anabay is the only machine-washable sofa inside and out. Say goodbye to stains and messes with liquid and stain-resistant fabrics that make cleaning easy. Liquids simply slide right off. Designed for custom comfort, our high-resilience foam lets you choose between a sink-in feel or a supportive memory foam blend. Plus, our pet-friendly, stain-resistant fabrics ensure your sofa stays beautiful for years. Don't compromise quality for price. Visit WashableSofas.com to upgrade your living space today. Sofas start at just $699 with no-risk returns and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Get up to 60% off, plus free shipping and free returns. Shop now at WashableSofas.com. Offers are subject to change and certain restrictions may apply.
Hey, this is U.S. Olympic gold medalist Tara Davis Woodhull.
And I'm U.S. Paralympic gold medalist Hunter Woodhull.
As athletes, our lives are about having a clear path.
And a team that you can absolutely trust.
So when it came to getting the best mortgage,
we chose PennyMac.
PennyMac is proud to be the official mortgage provider of Team USA and you.
Learn more at PennyMac.com. PennyMac Loan Services, LLC, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID 35953. Licensed by the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation under the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Conditions and restrictions may apply.
This is Julian Edelman from Games with Names. As a fellow dude, do you ever get that not-so-fresh feeling in your butt? That's because you're probably using the dry stuff to wipe. Wet, extra-large, flushable dude wipes get what toilet paper leaves behind in your behind. You wouldn't clean the tail end of your truck with dry paper towels, so why would you wipe with dry toilet paper? Wetter just cleans better. With dude wipes, there are no more dingleberries, no more itch and irritation, just a deep, down the seam, confident clean. Plus, unlike baby wipes, dude wipes are extra big for adult hands. You're not a baby, so keep them on hand so you get nothing on your hands. And speaking of on hand, dude wipes come in different scents and pack sizes, including a single-use, on-the-go pack that you can take anywhere for that home field advantage. Stop being an a-hole to your b-hole. Drop the toilet paper. Available on Amazon and major retailers nationwide. Dude wipes, best clean, pants down.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.